the time has come to finally speak about Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0. This is a short prequel story arc that takes place 1 year before the events of Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 1. The story centers around a totally different protagonist called Yuta Okotsu as he enrolls into Tokyo Jujutsu High. Yuta is considered to be a special grade cursed human who is haunted by one of his childhood friends called Rika Orimoto. We learn that she has been transformed into a special grade vengeful cursed spirit, and similarly to Yuji, our protagonist Yuta Okotsu is looked after by Gojo, and he is enrolled into Tokyo Jujutsu High. So in this video, we're going to be talking about all of the events that occur in Volume 0, which is also known as the Cursed Child Arc. We will cover Yuta enrolling into Jujutsu High as he works together with several of his allies, including Maki and Toge, and what happens when the evil Jujutsu sorcerer Suguru Geto learns about the source of Yuta's power, the vengeful cursed spirit of his childhood friend Rika. So without further delay, let's talk about this impactful prequel, which was so successful that it led to the weekly serialization of Jujutsu Kaisen. Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 was written and illustrated by Gigi Akutami from April 28, 2017 to July 28, 2017. It was initially intended to be a very short series, but the series was so well received that fans had desired for Gigi Akutami to continue the work. This had resulted in the serialization of Jujutsu Kaisen in Weekly Shonen Jump, and this Volume 0 prequel series came to be known as the Cursed Child Arc. After the release of the anime and the series continuing to gain more popularity, it was announced on the 27th of March 2021 that Volume 0 of Jujutsu Kaisen will be adapted into the first movie of Jujutsu Kaisen, and it will be released in December of 2021. Hence why I'm making a video analyzing Volume 0 in the same month that the movie is going to be released in. We already know that our protagonist Yuta Okotsu is haunted by the spirit of his childhood friend Rika. This occurs after Rika had died in a tragic car accident. The spirit of Rika transforms into a monster, and it's a far cry from the individual that Yuta had fallen in love with. This is because her spirit becomes cursed. This out of control cursed spirit ends up protecting Yuta against his will. Because of his lack of experience with the entire Jujutsu world, Yuta is unable to control the immense power of Rika. He doesn't know how to stop all of the bloodshed by the cursed spirit that is haunting him. He is eventually taken into custody by Jujutsu sorcerers, and while in isolation, Yuta states that he wishes to die, and this is because he doesn't want to hurt anybody else. But Satoru Gojo states that he has an alternative path for him to take, as he enlists Yuta into Tokyo Jujutsu High. It is here that he is tasked to study with other Jujutsu sorcerers so that he can control Rika, and instead of those powers being used to hurt people, he can use them to protect others. As a first year student, he learns how to fight along with his peers Maki Zenin, Panda and Toge Inumaki. While at Tokyo Jujutsu High, a change occurs for Yuta's character as he gains confidence with his abilities, and he starts to develop a desire to live, and this is through him forming friendships with the other first years and gaining confidence with utilizing his abilities. He is sent on a mission with Maki Zenin, where he is tasked to find missing children who have disappeared from an elementary school. The two of them work together to take care of several low-level curses, but eventually they are swallowed by a giant curse. While in the stomach of the cursed spirit, they discover two missing children. Maki and the children are not resistant to curses, so they need to get out of the cursed spirit as soon as possible. It is here why Maki questions Yuta as to why he became a sorcerer. He states that he wants to be relied on by somebody. He wants to believe that it's okay to continue living, because prior to this, he didn't want to hurt anybody anymore, and he tried to run away and disappear from the world. And it wasn't until Gojo arrived and had made him an alternative proposition that Yuta had ended up changing his beliefs. Yuta, who then desires to prove that he is worthy of living, puts on Rika's ring and asks for her to lend him her power. This results in the cursed spirit of Rika fully manifesting. Thanks to her intervention, it allows Yuta and Maki to rescue the two children. This ended up being the first time that Yuta had summoned Rika of his own will. After this, he states that he remembers a promise that he had made with Rika, that when the two of them grow up, they will get married, meaning that they will be together forever. This leads Yuta to question whether if it is Rika who is cursing him, or if it is Yuta who had cursed Rika back when he had made that promise to her. Either way, he wants to unravel the mystery behind Rika's curse, and to do this, he wants to stay at Tokyo Jujutsu High. Later, the Jujutsu higher-ups end up scolding Gojo because he had allowed for Yuta to completely manifest Rika. He reassures them that this is part of their plan, as they are planning on understanding Rika better so that they can control her power. But they remind him that Yuta's execution has only been postponed. But Gojo states that if it comes to that, he will side with Yuta and protect him. At this point, it's been 3 months since Yuta had enrolled into Jujutsu High, and he's been training with Maki and sparring with her. We learned that Gojo had told Yuta that it is going to be impossible to exercise a curse as powerful as Rika, but they can unravel the curse that is binding her soul. The first step is for Yuta to control the cursed energy by imbuing it into an object. Gojo explains that a curse is more stable when it is possessing an item, similar to how Yuta had manifested Rika's power through their ring. Gojo gives Yuta a katana, telling him to invoke the curse of Rika by channeling it into the katana and controlling it. He tells him to repeat this process and to gradually increase the energy and to eventually master it. This explains why Yuta had been training with Maki, as she specializes in utilizing cursed tools. Gojo then tasks Yuta with going on a mission with Toge Inumaki, so that he can learn about the unique applications of cursed techniques, as Toge is able to imbue his speech with cursed energy. The mission appears to be going well until it is interrupted by the appearance of a more powerful curse. The two of them work together as we see the growth that Yuta has undergone in a short period of time, and a friendship quickly forms between Toge and Yuta as he understands more about Toge's cursed speech technique and why he is quiet and mysterious, but despite this is very kind-hearted, as whenever he speaks he says harmless rice ball ingredients so that he doesn't end up accidentally cursing others. Later we learn that one of the 4 special grade sorcerers had been observing and interfering with Toge and Yuta's mission. This powerful sorcerer called Suguru Geto had casted a curtain around Yuta and Toge, trapping them inside with an unidentified semi-grade 1 curse. Suguru Geto is considered as one of the worst curse users. He was expelled from Jujutsu High as he's killed over 100 people, and it appears that he has now taken a liking to Yuta and is interested with how he utilizes the curse spirit of Rika. The goal of Suguru Geto is to bring about the age of Jujutsu sorcerers, and the first step to do this is to destroy the center of the Jujutsu world, Tokyo Jujutsu High. Geto then makes an appearance at Jujutsu High. He immediately arrives and speaks to Yuta, sharing his beliefs with him about how society is wrong, because Jujutsu sorcerers are forced to protect the weak. He tells him about his plans to destroy all non-Jujutsu sorcerers. After Geto mocks Maki by referring to her as the failure of the Zenin family, Yuta realizes that Geto isn't someone to be trusted. After all, he had insulted one of his friends. Gojo questions why Geto has returned to Jujutsu High, as he reveals to them that he is here to declare war against them. He tells them about his plans for a night parade of 100 demons, as he states that he will unleash over 1,000 curse spirits over Kyoto and Shinjuku, and he will order them to massacre all non-Jujutsu sorcerers. He challenges everybody at Tokyo Jujutsu High with protecting them. After unleashing a large curse spirit that keeps everybody preoccupied, Suguru Geto makes his leave. On December 24th, the day of the night parade of 100 demons, Geto acknowledges that his chances of winning are less than 20%, but if he is able to kill Yuta and capture the cursed spirit of Rika, then his chances will go up to 99%. And it is for this reason that the true objectives of this mission is to isolate Yuta Okotsu. We learned that Yuta and Maki had stayed behind at Tokyo Jujutsu High, while the other sorcerers, including Gojo, are at Shinjuku and Kyoto, dealing with the hundreds of curses that have appeared. During this time, Yuta questions Maki as to why Geto had referred to her as the failure of the Zenin family. She explains that this is because she cannot see curses, explaining why Maki doesn't like to be referred to as a member of the Zenin family, and why she couldn't help Yuta with his cursed energy. But then suddenly the entire school is engulfed by none other than Suguru Geto, as he arrives to target Yuta while everybody else is preoccupied. Gojo, however, questions why Geto hasn't arrived in the battlefield. It is then that he realizes that Geto has targeted Yuta. Through using his abilities, he teleports Toge and Panda back to the school. Toge, Panda and Maki prove to be no match for Geto, as they are brutally beaten by the experienced sorcerer. When Yuta eventually arrives, he finds that all of his friends have been critically injured, and it appears that Maki has been hurt the most. Toge, who is about to fall unconscious, tells Yuta to run away, but instead Yuta remains as he is enraged. For the second time in the story, he asks for help from the cursed spirit of Rika, as she once again completely manifests. Geto is under the impression that Yuta will die, but the furious Yuta challenges him and states that he is going to kill him, and so begins the final battle of Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, which involves Yuta and Rika versus Suguru Geto. Geto wants to utilize the power of Rika in order to establish a new world where Jujutsu sorcerers are acknowledged as gods, instead of being forced to protect the weak non-Jujutsu sorcerers. Yuta and Geto battle for control of Rika's power. Their battle begins as Geto utilizes several weaker cursed spirits in order to see how Rika will respond to them. Rika transports Toge, Panda and Maki out of harm's way, and this is where Yuta utilizes a reversed curse technique in order to heal them. The cursed spirit of Rika ends up becoming jealous of Maki, as she is angry that another girl is getting Yuta's attention. However, Yuta, who has no time for her tantrum, tells her to handle Maki with great care, as he owes her his life, and this is the first time that Yuta actually controls Rika. After his friends are healed, he appears once more before Geto. Geto appears to be impressed that Rika was able to heal his friends, as healing requires an advanced reversed curse technique. To begin his counterattack against Geto, Yuta manages to copy Toge's curse speech technique, and he does so through a large speakerphone megaphone. He demands for all of the cursed spirits under Geto's control to die. I love the transformation of Yuta's character here. His eyes have an apathetic glare, and it's heavily contrasted with his first appearance within the story, where he was generally unconfident and very afraid. Geto appears to be surprised that Yuta can utilize such high-level Jujutsu sorcery. He deduces that Rika is an entity that has limitless potential when it comes to cursed energy, and through her you can fairly easily manipulate the cursed energy into any technique. Geto then equips himself with a curse tool as he prepares to fight back against Yuta. He assumes that the body of Yuta is overflowing with cursed energy, which is giving him enhanced abilities. Through Volume 0, we get to know about the beliefs of Geto, as he states that Jujutsu sorcerers stand atop of the food chain. They are the most powerful individuals. He is angered that humans have the audacity to envision beings that are higher than Jujutsu sorcerers by creating gods through their religions. He finds it laughable. Geto's god complex angers Yuta as he fights back, but he is eventually caught off guard, as he appears to be entangled and trapped by an octopus-like curse. He is attacked several times by Geto before he can cut himself free. Geto continues to speak about his disdain for non-sorcerers, as he finds it sick that they hide away the word of Jujutsu sorcery from the rest of the world. Just as Yuta appears to be getting used to Geto's movements, his sword ends up breaking because of all of the cursed energy that is flowing through it. But this doesn't hold back Yuta, as he punches Geto in the face and sends him flying back with a left hook. Because Yuta is fairly new to the world of Jujutsu sorcery, he doesn't know whether if what Geto is saying is correct or not. His motive for fighting here is because Geto had threatened and hurt his friends, and it is for this reason that he is resolved to defeat him. When the odds appear to be stacked against Geto, he unleashes one of his most powerful techniques called Maximum Uzumaki, as he threatens to destroy Yuta. In order to deal with Geto, Yuta ends up thanking Rika for protecting him this entire time. He embraces the cursed spirit, as he asks for her help one last time, and he promises that after this they will be together forever. Yuta's words end up exciting the spirit of Rika as she grows stronger. He offers up to her his future, his heart, and his body. Geto understands that Yuta is sacrificing himself in order to surpass the limit of cursed energy. He becomes incredibly frustrated as Yuta takes advantage of the love that Rika has for him. In order to put a stop to Geto, Yuta utilizes the power of pure love, which is the most powerful curse of all. Rika unleashes a huge blast of cursed energy towards Geto and his cursed spirits. It results in a massive explosion as Geto desperately flees the scene. He is severely injured and is missing an arm. He swears to himself that he'll return to get Rika, but he is then confronted by his old friend Gojo. He tells him that all of his accomplices had run away, and that he had sent Panda and Inumaki to Jujutsu High to confront Geto because he was aware that he would not have killed them without a reason, because he had trust that an individual who has belief like Geto's would not kill a young Jujutsu sorcerer without any reason. This clearly demonstrates that these two characters have a long-standing history with each other, and it's only right for Gojo to take out Geto, as he asks him for any last words. Geto states that because of the way that the world is, he could never be happy truly from the bottom of his heart. He hates the way that non-Jujutsu sorcerers treat them, and in the end he has nothing against Jujutsu High. During the aftermath of the battle, we see Maki, Toge, and Panda checking up on Yuta. They end up thanking him for saving them. It is then that the cursed spirit of Rika calls for Yuta, as he apologizes for keeping her waiting. He explains that in exchange for her powers, he had agreed to go with her, as it appears that Yuta is about to die. But at that moment, the cursed form of Rika shatters, as it reveals the young form of Rika. Everybody is confused as Gojo arrives and explains what is going on. He states that the curse of Rika has been broken. He ended up doing some background research into the lineage of Yuta, as he reveals that he is a descendant of Michizane Sugawara, which means that he is a super distant relative of Gojo. Michizane Sugawara was one of the big three vengeful spirits. He was apparently a big shot Jujutsu sorcerer. Gojo reassures Yuta and states that Rika wasn't cursing him, and that it was in fact Yuta that had cursed Rika. When she had died, he couldn't accept her death, as he repeatedly had told her not to die. He had refused to let her go. Yuta is saddened to learn that it was his fault that Rika wasn't able to rest in peace, and that it was because of him she had turned into a curse and had hurt so many people. The young Rika embraces Yuta and thanks him. She was glad to have been given more time to be by his side, and that she was happier in these past 6 years than she was when she was alive. This is truly an emotional and touching farewell between these two characters. She tells Yuta to take care and to not come over to the other side anytime soon, as she finally leaves his side. Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 comes to an end as Gojo reveals that Geto had been his best friend at one time. Yuta meets with Toge, Panda, and Inumaki as it appears that he has been accepted into their group. He smiles as he is still wearing the ring that Rika had given him all those years ago, thus bringing an end to the prequel of Jujutsu Kaisen and explaining the story of Yuta Okotsu. Yuta's story is very similar to Yuji's, and it makes me look forward to these two characters finally meeting within the story, because at the moment Yuta appears to be on a mission abroad somewhere, and I look forward to catching up with this character as he's going to be making his appearance within the Jujutsu Kaisen manga in the upcoming arcs. This prequel hints at the history that is shared between Gojo and Geto. We know that Suguru Geto is one of the main antagonists within the early portions of Jujutsu Kaisen that we have covered so far, and it's fascinating for Gojo to refer to him as one of his best friends within this prequel chapter. There's a reason why I didn't read Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 before reading the actual manga. I wanted to be introduced into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen through his sequel series, as I feel like Akutami does a perfect job of introducing Yuji's character into Tokyo Jujutsu High, as we get to learn about the first years and the second years, and we know that Yuta is absent because he is abroad somewhere, so there is no pressure for us to read Volume 0 immediately off the gate. Personally, I had read Volume 0 after the death painting arc, and I feel like it is perfect to read before the arc that covers the past of Gojo, as Volume 0 hints at the past of Gojo, and some even said that Volume 0 is vital to read before the Shibuya incident arc at the very latest. Also, we get to learn about some basic information about Maki's character, and I feel like her character was one of the highlights for this prequel. I loved seeing the friendship that started to develop between Yuta and Maki, and how we get to learn about some basic history of a character, which is of course expanded upon in the Goodwill event arc. In the end, the extermination of Yuta was called off because the curse of Rika was set free, because both Yuta and Yuji were introduced into the world of Jujutsu sorcery in a very similar manner, and with Yuji also having a postponement of his extermination, it makes you wonder, by the end of the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, will Yuji be free of the curse of Sukuna, or will he end up dying in some way? Volume 0 definitely gives us a lot to think about and to draw comparisons from. Yuta was able to free himself of the curse of Rika, but we know that Yuji's character is centered around this theme of being surrounded by your loved ones on your deathbed, and it is for this reason that a lot of people believe that the endgame of Jujutsu Kaisen will be the death of Yuji. Volume 0 gives us an option of why the protagonist survives, so it is fitting if the sequel series results in the protagonist dying in the end, especially since the start of Jujutsu Kaisen had focused so heavily on this idea of Yuji being killed because he had manifested the spirit of Ryumen Sukuna. In this video series, I'm going to be going through each arc of Jujutsu Kaisen from the very beginning to the latest chapter of the story. From the minute that I began reading the manga and then checking out the anime, I'd fallen in love with Jujutsu Kaisen. This is because it is so reminiscent of pre-existing shonen series that I absolutely love, like Yu Yu Hakusho, Bleach, and Naruto. It is evident that Gigi Akutami has taken heavy influence from these shonen stories. Despite this heavy inspiration, he ensures that his story remains unique in this oversaturated supernatural horror genre. Now, if you've been following me on Twitter, then you already know how much I love Jujutsu Kaisen. What I want to do in this video series is to break down each arc of the story, and to explain the character growth, the power system, and the story that unfolds. So without any further delay, join me as I break down the story of Jujutsu Kaisen from the very first chapter, and prove why it is one of the most unique series to come from Weekly Shonen Jump in the last decade. Jujutsu Kaisen began as a manga series with its first chapter published on the 5th of March 2018. It was later adapted into an anime with its first episode airing on October 3rd, 2020. This series has been received incredibly well by fans across the world, with the manga having over 50 million copies in circulation. With it only having debuted over 3 years ago, it is already one of the best-selling manga series of all time. The story of Jujutsu Kaisen is broken down into several different story arcs, and as of making this video, there are just under 160 chapters released, which are spread across 11 story arcs. The first 4 chronological chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen cover the Cursed Child arc. This follows the story of Yuta Okotsu. These 4 chapters were released 1 year prior to the initial serialization of Jujutsu Kaisen, and it was because of the success of these 4 prequel chapters that Jujutsu Kaisen was greenlit as a story. Now, the Cursed Child arc will be adapted into a movie that will release at the end of this year, so I will cover these 4 chapters down the line. But as for this video, I'm covering the first 2 story arcs of the series, which are the Introduction arc, which spans from chapters 1 to 5, and the Cursed Womb arc, which covers chapters 6 to 9 of the story. The main focus of the world of Jujutsu Kaisen is this concept of cursed energy. It is set in a world where cursed spirits are created from the negative energy that humans generate. Over time, this negative cursed energy accumulates in certain areas, and it results in the formation of what is known as cursed spirits. These cursed spirits pose a threat to humans in various different ways. The story does an excellent job of explaining very early on what cursed energy and cursed spirits are, as we learn that one of the most powerful cursed spirits who existed over 1,000 years ago had his cursed energy split into 20 indestructible fingers called Sukuna's fingers. Sukuna's fingers are an example of cursed objects, and the story of Jujutsu Kaisen kicks off when our protagonist Yuji Itadori comes into contact with one of Sukuna's fingers. The introduction arc begins with us being introduced to the character of Megumi Fushiguro. We learn that he is looking for a special grade cursed object. The cursed object that Megumi is looking for is indeed one of Sukuna's fingers. When he appears to have difficulty locating the special grade cursed object, we then cut to Yuji Itadori. Our protagonist of the story is introduced as a first-year high school student, and he is a member of a after-school occult research club. Despite Yuji being gifted with incredible athletic ability, he would much rather spend his time investigating paranormal occurrences in and around his school. He makes it clear that he has his own reasons behind why he is a member of the occult research club. Megumi ends up bumping into Yuji and notices that there is something strange about him, and he can feel the presence of the cursed object growing even stronger after Yuji walks past him. He is surprised by Yuji's enhanced physical abilities, because it is evident that he isn't utilizing any cursed energy to enhance himself. Gigi Akutami makes it very clear that before Yuji became a Jujutsu sorcerer, he already was physically gifted. We quickly find out where Yuji was rushing off to after school, as we see him visiting the hospital. During the very first chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, a character-defining moment occurs for Yuji, as we learn that this meeting with his grandfather would indeed be his last, as Yuji's grandfather imparts with him wisdom that Yuji carries forward throughout the entirety of the story. And it's no exaggeration to state that the words of Yuji's grandfather end up defining his character. Upon meeting his grandfather, he tells Yuji that he has some final words for him. They are about his parents, but Yuji makes it clear that he doesn't care, he doesn't want to hear anything about them. His grandfather tells him that he is a strong kid, so he needs to use his strength for good. He advises Yuji to help people. It doesn't have to be all of the time, but just whenever he can. He may not receive any gratitude from people despite helping them, but he should continue to do so. These are the words of wisdom that his grandfather instills within him. The reason that he had told Yuji to help people is because he doesn't want his grandson to end up like him, laying on his deathbed with only his grandson there to see him off into the afterlife. These are the final words that Yuji hears from his grandfather. A dying wish. His grandfather's desire for Yuji to help as many people as he can, and for him to be surrounded by his loved ones when he dies. Like I mentioned, his grandfather's final words end up becoming a driving factor for Yuji's character, resulting in him making a lot of decisions and being guided by his grandfather's final wish. This is a very humble and simplified desire that our protagonist has within this story, and it reminds me a lot of Yusuke's desire within Yu Yu Hakusho, or the desire of Ichigo from Bleach. It isn't anything larger than life, it is but a simple yet relatable goal. With the mystery of Yuji's parents being left unresolved, we can assume that he has just lost the only family member that he has ever known, leaving him on his own now. The entire situation hasn't really sunk in for Yuji, but he remains with an optimistic attitude, as he states that his grandfather would not want him to be moping around. He would want him to continue on with his life despite his death. And it is at this moment that Yuji is formally introduced to Megumi Fushiguro, who is a first-year Jujutsu sorcerer from Jujutsu High. We learn that the special grade cursed object that Megumi has been looking for is in the possession of Yuji's occult research club. Then the fascinating premise that pulls us into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen is explained to us, as we learn that nationally on average 10,000 people either die of unexplained causes or are reported as missing. The vast majority of these unexplained cases are a result of the negative energy that flows out of people. This negative energy is defined as a curse. Understandably, Yuji finds this hard to believe, but Megumi continues by explaining that in locations where a large group of people gather, like schools or hospitals, those environments are susceptible to receiving a large amount of negative energy. In general, people will feel pain, regret, or humiliation the more that they dwell upon their bad memories. This negative energy accumulates as curses in the locations that these memories had occurred. So it is for this reason that it is common to find cursed objects within schools or hospitals. Megumi explains that this is how Yuji was able to easily find this special grade cursed object within his school. After finding out that Yuji's friends have the cursed object, and they are going to remove the seal off of it tonight at school, they end up rushing to the school because Yuji's friends are at risk of dying. The members of the occult research club end up removing the seal, revealing underneath it a finger. After removing the seal, cursed spirits begin to be drawn to their location, and Yuji and Megumi can feel this intense pressure coming from the school. Megumi tells Yuji to stay put while he goes to help his friends. Yuji insists that he is also coming because he feels responsible for getting them into trouble. Despite the fact that he has only been friends with them for a couple of months, he still wants to do something to help. The cursed spirits begin tormenting Yuji's friends, and in this instance, Megumi gives us our first glimpse of a cursed technique, as he summons a white and black dog to his aid. While all of this is going on, we cut back to Yuji, as we see him trembling in fear. He asks himself, what is he doing? A very important inner monologue occurs here, as Yuji says to himself that somehow he is able to feel death emanating from the school. He admits that he is afraid of dying, and he wonders if his grandpa had felt the same on his deathbed. He then quickly corrects himself and states that his grandpa wasn't afraid of death, and he was emotional after his grandpa's death because he was sad. It wasn't that he was scared. This feeling of death that Yuji is now facing is very different to the death that he had encountered when his grandpa had just passed away. Remembering his grandfather's final wish for Yuji to help people, it inspires him to take action instead of standing there feeling afraid. We can see that the cursed spirits that have appeared within the school want the cursed object. Megumi finds one of Yuji's friends about to be devoured by a cursed spirit. When he admits that he is too late to save her, Yuji appears on the scene. He breaks through the window, double kicking the cursed spirit. Megumi is stunned that Yuji was able to jump all the way up to the 4th floor of the school. And like I've been stating throughout this video, Yuji is clearly a special and gifted individual. And throughout this first chapter, I wish that we got to hear what Yuji's grandfather had to say about Yuji's parents. Clearly, the secret of his enhanced physical abilities lies with the identity of his parents. When he arrives to protect his friend, Yuji comes face to face with a curse for the first time. You can see that throughout this chapter, Yuji takes action and comes out of his comfort zone whenever he remembers the dying words of his grandfather. He continuously reaffirms this desire to help people, and it is for this reason that he comes to Megumi's aid when he is attacked by a large cursed spirit. Yuji tries to fight against the cursed spirit with his bare fists, but Megumi states that the only way to exercise a curse is by using cursed energy. When Yuji realizes that the cursed spirit is after the finger of Sukuna, he ends up swallowing the cursed object. He does so in order to save everybody. Megumi rightfully calls him out and states that he's an idiot. He has consumed a special grade cursed object. For an ordinary human, it is a lethal poison. There is no way that Yuji won't die, but Megumi states that Yuji does however have a 1 in a million chance of surviving. And just at that moment, the legendary curse of Ryumen Sukuna manifests within Yuji's body. Taking control of his body, he easily destroys this large cursed spirit. After consuming the cursed object, Yuji's appearance has completely changed. He has this sinister, sadistic expression on his face, which reminds me of when Ichigo's hollow takes over his body. Megumi thinks to himself that he was right. It was either that Yuji was going to die, or there was a 1 in a million chance that the special grade cursed object would incarnate itself. Sukuna declares that he is going to massacre all of the humans, but at this moment, Yuji takes back control of his body. It is at the end of chapter 1 that Yuji realizes that he can suppress Sukuna from manifesting within his body. But after Yuji had eaten the cursed finger, Megumi declares that he is no longer a human. Under the Jujutsu regulations, Yuji Itadori is now a curse, and Megumi states that he is going to exorcise him. The second chapter immediately introduces us to my favorite character within the story, the individual who teaches the first years at Jujutsu High, Satoru Gojo. He reveals to Yuji that his secret execution has been set. We then cut back to Yuji at the school prior to being captured by Gojo. Just as Megumi is about to exorcise Yuji, Gojo arrives. He learns that Yuji ended up eating the cursed object. Gojo asks Yuji to allow Sukuna to control his body for 10 seconds. It appears that Gojo wants to test out his strength against the strongest spirit. Yuji expresses his concern, but Gojo reassures him by immediately revealing to us and to him that he is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. During this scene, we also learn that while all of this was happening at Yuji's school, Gojo had been shopping for souvenirs while people's lives were in danger. You can tell that he is a very cool but carefree character. I suppose anybody would behave like this if they were dubbed as the strongest in the world. Gojo briefly demonstrates his abilities against Sukuna, who is no match for him. He is shocked at Gojo's speed. Just before the time limit of 10 seconds is about to be up, Sukuna fires an attack towards Gojo, but he appears to have easily diverted it away from him, leaving Gojo unscathed. Sukuna is subdued as Yuji takes back control over his body. Gojo ends up knocking Yuji out. As he asks Megumi what they should do with him, he rightfully tells Gojo that Yuji should be executed under the Jujutsu regulations. But it appears that Megumi has taken a liking to Yuji, as he states that he doesn't want him to die. Because of Megumi's request, it appears that Gojo is going to pull some strings in order to save Yuji. Thanks to Gojo being the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, he is able to suspend the execution of Yuji. Gojo then explains to him that there are 20 of Sukuna's fingers in total. Currently, Jujutsu sorcerers are in possession of 6. Sukuna's fingers cannot be destroyed because they are that much of a powerful curse, and with each passing day the fingers get stronger. We learn that nobody alive is able to seal these fingers. That is until the appearance of Yuji, who demonstrates that he can swallow Sukuna's fingers and control the powerful curse. If Yuji is able to successfully consume all 20 of Sukuna's fingers, then when Yuji dies, the curse of Sukuna will die along with him. Thanks to Gojo's influence, he is able to convince the higher-ups of the Jujutsu world not to exterminate Yuji. Gojo proposed to the higher-ups that there is no guarantee they will come across a vessel of Sukuna again, so he had told them if they are going to kill Yuji, then why not kill him after he has consumed all of Sukuna's fingers? Gojo then proposes 2 options for Yuji. Either he dies now, or he finds the remaining fingers of Sukuna, and he is killed after he has taken them all into his body. After saying goodbye to his friends, Yuji has a insightful conversation with Gojo. He asks Yuji if he has made a decision. He replies to Gojo by asking if a lot of casualties occur because of curses. Gojo tells him of course. Individuals are considered to be lucky if they can die a normal death after running into a curse. Even if a body is found all torn up, then that is still considered a best case scenario. Gojo warns Yuji that if he is serious about locating all of Sukuna's fingers, then he is going to come across some gruesome scenes, and he cannot guarantee Yuji's own safety. Once again, it is the words of his dying grandfather that guide him into deciding that he is going to help people. After realizing that if Sukuna is eliminated, fewer people are going to be killed by curses, he agrees to help Gojo and the Jujutsu sorcerers. He shows his conviction in his decision by consuming the second finger of Sukuna, now having contained 1/10 of Sukuna within his body. Yuji indeed is a fascinating individual. His innate talent and abilities even get the interest of the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, as Gojo notes that not only is Yuji's body resisting the curse of Sukuna, but he is also able to control it without any issue. He states that an individual like Yuji only appears once every 1,000 years or so. Even before enrolling into Jujutsu High or learning about cursed energy, Yuji is able to demonstrate that he has phenomenal ability, and again it leaves you wondering about Yuji's parents, if their identities will reveal the mysteries surrounding Yuji's character. By the end of the second chapter, Yuji affirms his goal, which is to eat the rest of Sukuna's fingers. He is doing this primarily because of the last request of his grandfather. He knows that if he is able to help others, then when it is Yuji's time to die, at least he will be surrounded by people who care for him. He is then taken to Tokyo, where he enrolls into Tokyo Jujutsu High. It is revealed that he is one of the 3 first-year students, and he will be taught by Gojo himself. Of course, Megumi is one of his classmates, but the identity of the 3rd student still remains a mystery. Upon arriving at the school, Yuji is taken to have a meeting with the principal. During his interview with the principal, Yuji's motives for becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer are called into question, as Yuji affirms he wants to prevent people dying because of curses. His reason for doing this, of course, is because of his grandfather's final request. The principal questions this motive, whether if Yuji is really going to fight against curses just because someone had asked him to. Yuji is continuously attacked by one of the principal's dogs until he gives a worthy enough answer to him. Yuji is made aware that becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer is a very unpleasant job. The qualifications for being a Jujutsu sorcerer are to be very motivated and slightly crazy. The principal then asks Yuji if he ends up dying, is he going to blame his grandfather because he had told him to help people. The principal here is helping Yuji to realize his true motives, and it's a great way for us to see Yuji's resolve tested so early on in the story. So when Yuji is asked for one final time why is he here in Jujutsu High, he tells the principal that he knows that consuming the fingers of Sukuna is only something that Yuji can do. If he runs away from this mission or tries to escape from his execution, he would constantly live with this feeling that because of his actions, people are now going to die because of the curse of Sukuna. Yuji is accepted into Jujutsu High when he proclaims that he is not going to regret the way that he has lived his life, and it is for this reason that he is going to help people by destroying the curse of Sukuna. After Yuji is enrolled into the school, we are then introduced to our 3rd first-year student, Nobara Kugisaki. She is referred to as the Girl of Steel. Jujutsu sorcerers are incredibly rare, because it is rare to come across somebody who can actually see curses, and it is for this reason that the first year of Tokyo Jujutsu High only has 3 students. After we are introduced to Nobara's character, we quickly learn that she is hot-headed, but she has a very silly and playful side, similar to Yuji. We quickly begin to understand the dynamic between the 3 first years, as Megumi is serious, mature, and often frowns upon Yuji and Nobara, as the 2 of them are easily excitable and easily given to Gojo's playful personality. While Megumi is recovering from his injuries, Gojo Gojo has Yuji and Nobara go on a mission. They are to exorcise any curses that have been haunting an abandoned building within Roppongi. Gojo wants to see what the two of them are capable of, so this is in fact just a simple test of their abilities. From this we can tell that Gojo already has an understanding of Megumi's abilities, and it's pretty much hinted here that Megumi and Gojo have known each other for a while, since the only way to defeat a curse is to expel it by using cursed energy. Gojo ends up giving Yuji what's known as a cursed tool, a blade called the Slaughter Demon. We learn that cursed tools for the most part are weapons that have cursed energy flowing through them. Gojo also orders Yuji on this field test not to let Sukuna out. If Yuji relied on the abilities of Sukuna, sure, he would be able to eliminate the curses easily, but he would also put in danger the humans that are near to him. And since Roppongi is a densely populated area, it would be wise not to rely on Sukuna. Now you've probably noticed this, but Gojo's character is very reminiscent of Kakashi and Urahara. A lot of what he says has double meanings, and he doesn't always reveal his true intentions from the get-go. As after Yuji and Nobara begin their mission, Gojo reveals to Megumi that this is more of a test for Nobara. Megumi was insisting to Gojo that he wanted to also go on the mission in order to keep an eye on Yuji, but Gojo wants to see how Nobara can deal with the situation, if she can handle working as a team while at the same time dealing with Yuji's unpredictable abilities. As their mission begins, there's some friction between Yuji and Nobara, so they split up, quickly taking out the nearby curses. The thing about this mission is that Gojo knows that Yuji is a crazy individual. For the most part, he has lived his life as a typical teenager, but when it comes to facing off against curses, Yuji has no fear, and this is something that even Jujutsu sorcerers who have great potential struggle to overcome initially. It is because of their fear and disgust of curses that they don't live up to their great potential. Megumi is used to seeing curses from a young age, but for Yuji, who had never seen one in his life, and for him to easily challenge a curse in order to protect his friends, proves to Gojo that he has what it takes to become a Jujutsu sorcerer. During this mission, he wants to see if Nobara too has this crazy side to her, and as we're about to see, Gojo is not going to be disappointed, because Nobara is one of the most craziest characters within Jujutsu Kaisen. She's able to easily identify a curse who is disguising itself as a mannequin. She draws out some nails and a hammer as she demonstrates her curse technique. Nobara had been raised and born on the countryside, so the curses that she is used to from there don't compare to the curses that are formed within an area like Tokyo. Since Tokyo is more densely populated, it will obviously result in the generation of more cursed energy, resulting in the cursed spirits from this area being a lot more stronger than the cursed spirits from the countryside. When the cursed spirit that Nobara is fighting against ends up taking a child hostage, Nobara frustratingly drops her weapons and surrenders. She is very frustrated because the curse that she is going up against is probably a grade 4 curse, which is one of the lower leveled cursed spirits. Just as Nobara accepts that she is going to be defeated by the cursed spirit, Yuji interrupts them, breaking through the walls, saving the kidnapped child. When the cursed spirit takes this opportunity to leave the abandoned building, Nobara quickly takes the initiative to use one of her straw doll techniques. Similar to a voodoo doll, she drills a nail through the straw doll, and it results in the cursed spirit being exorcised. This ends up proving to Gojo that Nobara too is a very crazy individual, and she has what it takes to become a Jujutsu sorcerer. This concludes the first introduction arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, as we are excellently introduced to all of the key characters within the story. We had an opportunity to see Yuji and Megumi working together to face off against cursed spirits. We saw Gojo briefly battle against Sukuna, even having the opportunity to see Yuji's resolve tested so early on within the story, when he is interviewed by the principal, and how he is able to fight his case and prevent his execution. And lastly, we quickly got introduced to the character of Nobara Kugisaki, and we already got to see her working alongside Yuji to battle against cursed spirits. Everything unfolds very quickly, one thing after the other, and it's a lot to take in. And it did take me a couple of read-throughs to make sure that I didn't miss any of the details, because so much happens within these first 5 chapters. But I still believe that Jujutsu Kaisen has a very strong introduction, and it throws you right into the world of Jujutsu sorcerers and cursed spirits. The next arc, titled the Cursed Womb arc, is briefly mentioned at the end of chapter 5, as we get a shocking revelation just prior to the beginning of the story arc. On one of the panels, we see Yuji's face as it begins to be blurred out, then with details of a report from July 2018, the location being in West Tokyo City at a juvenile detention center. We get the brief outline of this mission, as the report reveals to us that a special grade cursed spirit was witnessed by multiple non-Jujutsu sorcerers. This was deemed as an emergency. This cursed spirit was floating above the sky of the juvenile detention center, and as a result, 3 first-year students were sent to the scene. However, chapter 5 ends with a shocking revelation that one of the 3 first-year students had ended up dying. We can assume from the panel that Gigi Akutami draws of Yuji fading away that of course it is Yuji who ends up dying. This excellent premise leads us into the second arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Cursed Womb arc. So when Yuji and the others arrive at the detention center, they are made aware that most of the inmates were evacuated, aside from 5 of them who are currently trapped inside the building along with the curse. The first year students are made aware that when a cursed womb grows and changes shape, it can be expected to transform into a cursed spirit that is close to a special grade level. It is here that the tiers and rankings of cursed spirits is broken down for us. In order for us to understand the incremental changes of the different grade leveled curses, examples of traditional weapons being used are given as an example for us to understand how much of a threat level each graded cursed spirit is, with grade 4 cursed spirits being described as being beaten by wooden bats, with grade 3 cursed spirits being beaten by a pistol, grade 2 or semi-grade 2 cursed spirits being beaten by a shotgun, and when up against a grade 1 or semi-grade 1 cursed spirit, then a tank may be ineffective. And lastly, the most powerful cursed spirit that one can encounter, a special grade cursed spirit, you may find that carpeting explosives, like cluster bombing, may be effective. This is when a large area of land is bombarded in a progressive manner to inflict damage to every single area of that land. However, the power of a special grade varies immensely, and as we're about to see within this story arc, the 3 characters are going to be up against a special grade cursed spirit, and you will quickly understand why even a cluster bomb may be ineffective against one. Truthfully, the first years are told that Gojo should have come on this mission, but because he is away on business, and the Jujutsu world is very short on manpower, they have no other choice but to rely on the first years in such a extreme emergency. Yuji and the others are told not to engage with the special grade cursed spirit. Their only options are to either run away or die. Prior to beginning the mission, a mother of one of the 5 inmates who is currently trapped within the detention center approaches them. She wants to know if her son is okay. They tell her that there is a possibility that poison has spread within the facility, and they cannot guarantee her son's safety. After seeing the mother crying, Yuji and the others resolve to save her son. When they enter into the curtain that is concealing the detention facility, Megumi unleashes one of his divine dogs. It will alert them if the curse ends up coming closer to them. As they begin to explore the facility, they immediately come across a mutilated corpse. The words of Gojo from an earlier chapter echo in our mind, that when an individual comes across a cursed spirit, it is considered a best case scenario even if a mutilated body is found. They realize that the body that they have found was that lady's son who they had only moments ago resolved to save. A moral conflict quickly erupts between Megumi and Yuji, as Yuji wants to take the remains of this body back to its mother. Megumi explains to Yuji that this individual isn't even worth saving even if he was alive. He has to remember that he is an inmate within a juvenile detention center. He was convicted for driving without a license, and he ended up hitting a girl who was walking home from school, and this had been his second time driving without a license. Megumi tells Yuji that he always wants to save as many people as possible, but who's to say that the people that Yuji saves won't end up killing other people in the future. But before their argument can continue, a portal forms under Nobara's feet as she falls through the ground. At the same time, Megumi realizes that his divine dog has been defeated, and at that moment they are approached by the special grade curse. They both end up being frozen in fear. Yuji attempts to attack the cursed spirit, but his left hand is severed, along with the cursed tool that he had been using being split in 2. While Yuji and Megumi are up against the special grade, Nobara finds herself in a dark environment. She can sense the presence of a curse though. Yuji ends up battling against the special grade on his own, while Megumi rushes off in order to save Nobara. It took a lot from Megumi to place his trust into Yuji, to trust that he would be okay and he wouldn't die against the special grade. Otherwise, Megumi would not have left him on his own. Yuji's plan is to buy enough time so that Megumi can save Nobara. Like Yuji had said, the cursed spirit appears to be playing with him. It is aware of how powerful he is. As Yuji struggles, as he experiences hurt and pain, the words of his grandfather continue to echo in his mind. His final request to help people. Just like when many of us face difficulty, our minds begin to take over and tell us to run away from the situation, convincing us that we would be rather doing anything but this difficult task. Yuji's mind begins to tell himself that he doesn't want to die. He then screams out and tells himself not to think. We then cut to Nobara as it appears that she has just barely defeated a cursed spirit, and she is going to be consumed by another. Megumi ends up saving her as they escape the facility. At the end of chapter 7, when Yuji realizes how weak he truly was, and that he doesn't want to die in an unnatural manner, he begins to think of the words of the principle, that no Jujutsu sorcerer dies without regret. Yuji remembers that curses are formed because of negative energy flowing out of people, so all of the hatred, fear and regret that Yuji is feeling right now, he unleashes it into his fist, and we see that his right hand is surrounded by cursed energy as he punches the cursed spirit. And just at that moment, when he receives a signal that Megumi and Nobara are safe, Sukuna takes over Yuji's body. Sukuna demonstrates his monstrous power by easily taking out the special grade cursed spirit. He utilizes a special Jujutsu technique called domain expansion. His domain expansion is called Malevolent Shrine. It results in him cutting up the cursed spirit in several slices. It appears that this special grade had consumed one of Sukuna's fingers. After Sukuna defeats the special grade, Yuji is unable to regain consciousness. This results in Sukuna running free with Yuji's body. Sukuna then ends up confronting Megumi, as he ends up taking Yuji's body hostage. After consuming the finger that he had received from the special grade, he resolves now to kill Megumi. In chapter 9, Megumi is left with no choice but to battle against Sukuna, and this is one of the most important exchanges within the entirety of this story, and the reason why Sukuna ends up taking a liking to Megumi so early on. During this battle, we learn about Megumi's desire to save people, whether if it's fair or not. Megumi utilizes his Shikigami in order to battle against Sukuna. He is impressed with how Megumi is able to get into close quarters combat, while also effectively using his Shikigami. Sukuna is impressed that Megumi isn't afraid to mix things up. Despite being outmatched by Sukuna, Megumi ends up leaving an impression on him, to the point that Sukuna wonders why is it that Megumi had run away from that special grade. It is like Sukuna knows the latent potential within Megumi. He is probably aware that if Megumi had fought against that special grade, then he may well have ended up defeating it. When the situation appears to be hopeless, Megumi remembers why he had saved Yuji. He recalls back to his sister, who is currently hospitalized. He recalls this phrase that the only thing fair about life is how unfair it is to everybody. He recalls how kind his sister was to everybody, but despite this, she was cursed. Thinking about all of this in his past, Megumi states that he didn't save Yuji because it was the most logical thing to do. He just didn't want to see a good person end up dying. He says that despite it being a selfish, emotional decision, he is glad that he had ended up saving Yuji, and that is exactly the reason why he had not regretted saving him, not even for a moment. And this resolves the conflict that Yuji and Megumi had a few chapters ago. After Megumi explains his reasoning, Yuji takes back control over his body, but it appears to be too late as the damage is already done. At the end of chapter 9, Yuji wishes Megumi, Nobara, and Gojo Sensei well, as he appears to have died, and just as he had always wished, Yuji ends up dying with a smile on his face. This now brings us to the conclusion of the Cursed Womb arc, and takes us into the third story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Cursed Training arc. Now we'll be covering this in my next video on Jujutsu Kaisen. The material that I had covered in this video I read almost a year and a half ago, and revisiting these chapters really did make me have a newfound appreciation for them, especially after watching the Jujutsu Kaisen anime and having caught up to the latest chapter of the manga. Like I had mentioned earlier on, there is a lot to digest within these first 9 chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen. So many characters and concepts are introduced to us. It is hard to remember everything, but once everything becomes familiar, you have a newfound appreciation for the start of this series. I've always said this about the start of this series: Jujutsu Kaisen wastes no time by throwing us right into the action. We have very little downtime for things to really sink in, as we are taken from one major event to the next. And as you can see, by the end of the second arc, this hasn't changed in the slightest, as we have already had a shocking revelation that our protagonist has died by chapter 9. Now a lot of people, including myself, had gotten into Jujutsu Kaisen because it was so reminiscent of Bleach, at least the early portions of the Bleach story. But for me, I truly believe that this series is a mixture of Yu Yu Hakusho, Hunter x Hunter, and Bleach. It has the perfect blend of a very uniquely written protagonist and a fascinating cast of characters, and this is combined with the complexity that we all too often see associated with Hunter x Hunter. The concepts of cursed energy and cursed techniques are very similar to the power system of Nen that is featured within Hunter x Hunter. We are only 9 chapters into reviewing this series, and I have to say that I love it as much as the first time that I had read these chapters. Welcome to the second video in my Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis series, and in this video I'm going over the third arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Cursed Training arc. A lot occurs within this portion of the story, as we get key concepts introduced to us and the explanation of cursed energy, as well as finally being able to see one of my favourite characters, Gojo, taking part in an actual battle. In addition to all of this, we get the introduction of students from a rival Jujutsu school. Admittedly, it was during this story arc that I had started to really like Jujutsu Kaisen, so let's begin my breakdown of the third story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Cursed Training arc, as we're going to cover all of the characters and concepts that are introduced to us. The Cursed Training arc takes place between chapters 10 to 18 and is adapted into 4 episodes of the anime, spanning from episode 5 to 8 of the series. Megumi and Nobara are aware of Yuji having died, and at this point of the story, a lot of people, including myself, had assumed that the protagonist of Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, Yuta Okotsu, would have become the new protagonist of the story. But in chapter 10, it is specifically mentioned that we haven't seen Yuta, who is a second year Jujutsu High student, absent because he is currently away doing duties abroad. This series really kicks it into high gear with the Cursed Training arc as we are introduced to the main antagonistic characters within the story. We are introduced to the characters of Suguru Geto and his accomplices Jogo and Hanami. We learn that they were responsible for the appearance of that cursed womb above the juvenile detention facility. They had purposefully planted one of Sukuna's fingers in that location and had resulted in the cursed womb appearing. When Gojo arrives back at Jujutsu High, he is furious after learning what has happened. He can't comprehend why first-year Jujutsu High students were sent to deal with a special grade curse. Gojo quickly assumes that the higher-ups had sent the first-year Jujutsu High students in order to eliminate Yuji by making him face off against a special grade curse. Gojo is of course furious that they had done all of this behind his back, and after learning about Yuji's death, you can tell that Gojo had taken a liking to him. Megumi and Nobara, who have learnt about Yuji's death, are consoled by the second years of Jujutsu High, and it is here that we are introduced to characters like Maki, Toge, and Panda. They tell the two first-year students about the Kyoto Sister School Goodwill event. It is a Goodwill event that takes place with another Jujutsu High School, which is located within Kyoto. This event is practically a battle between the students of one school against the other. The only rule is that no killing is allowed. Panda and the other second years suggest that they are going to help Megumi and Nobara to prepare for the Goodwill event. They tell them to do it for the sake of their fallen friend. The two of them agree and state that they are going to become stronger. They resolve to do this for Yuji's sake. At the end of chapter 10, we get a meeting between Suguru Geto and the cursed spirit Jogo. They agree terms to their alliance that they are about to form. Jogo's desire is to put an end to humanity so that curses can rule over the world, but Geto tells him that two conditions must be met in order to actualize this future. The first is to get rid of Satoru Gojo in some way. Geto proposes a means to immobilize or seal him, and the second condition is to make an ally out of Sukuna, the most powerful cursed spirit. When this second condition is mentioned, Jogo states that isn't the vessel of Sukuna already dead, but Geto advises him not to be so sure of that. We then surprisingly cut to Yuji, who is looking up at the face of Sukuna. This exchange between Yuji and Sukuna is taking place within Yuji's soul. He ultimately ends up fighting against Sukuna in order to take back control over his body. Sukuna agrees to heal Yuji, but only if he agrees to a binding vow with him. However, Yuji refuses to listen to any of Sukuna's terms. Sukuna then suggests that they fight to the death. If Yuji ends up winning, then he will heal him without any conditions, but if Sukuna wins, then he will revive him with the binding vow intact. Of course, before Yuji can even make a move, he is defeated by the cursed spirit. Now, the conditions of this binding vow that Sukuna had made with Yuji grant him with two conditions. Yuji is to allow Sukuna to take over his body for 1 full minute when he chants the phrase Enchain, and during this 1 minute, Sukuna promises not to kill anyone that Yuji knows. And the second final condition of this binding vow is that Yuji will forget all about this agreement. Now, from Sukuna's actions earlier on in the story, you would have assumed that he wouldn't have cared if Yuji had died, but it appears that he is taking a liking to being manifested within Yuji's body. We did learn from Megumi in the first chapter that it is a very rare occurrence for Yuji not to have died, and for him to have actually manifested the spirit of Sukuna. It appears that Sukuna wants to stick around because the game has changed, and in particular he has taken a liking to Megumi, as we see a panel which references his character when Sukuna states that very soon they will see something interesting, and it makes you wonder what on earth he is talking about. But for now, Yuji has been revived, and he has made a binding vow with Sukuna that he has now forgotten. Now, I'm sure that this will play a significant role within the story much later on, but immediately after this, we move from one interesting scene to another, as we learn about the dream of our best boy Satoru Gojo. Gojo believes that the current higher-ups within the Jujutsu world are all scum. He describes them as selfish and proud idiots, who are so hung up and focused on bloodlines, and it is because of the way that the higher-ups of the Jujutsu world have been behaving that Gojo dreams to reset the Jujutsu world, and this ends up explaining why the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer is stuck within a school teaching students. Gojo says that he has turned to education in order to develop and grow strong allies. He needs to foster his students so that they can fight alongside with him in the future. Gojo is speaking very frankly here because he is genuinely upset at the death of Yuji. He had seen a lot of potential within him, but just as Yuji's autopsy is about to begin, he wakes up completely healed, as it appears that Sukuna has kept his end of the deal. Gojo then goes on to say that they should still report that Yuji is deceased. We then learn that Gojo is going to train Yuji so that he is ready for the Goodwill event. Meanwhile, Suguru Geto and the others discuss a way of eliminating Gojo. They do admit that even if all of them work together, they will be unable to defeat Gojo. Geto then suggests that instead of focusing on killing Gojo, they need to turn their attention towards sealing him, and this is where he suggests that they use a special grade cursed item called Prison Realm. So early on within the Cursed Training arc, everything begins to start making sense, as we get an understanding of the current leaders of the Jujutsu world and how Gojo wants to overthrow them, because they are set in their old ways, unwilling to change. Gojo knows that the enemies and the cursed spirits are growing stronger and stronger. The cursed spirit that was born from the cursed womb was classified as a special grade, while Sukuna is also regarded as a special grade cursed spirit by the Jujutsu higher-ups. Now with time, what has happened is that the cursed spirits have grown far too strong, and they have outgrown the ranking systems that were created by the higher-ups. Sukuna even comments upon this when he defeats the special grade curse created from the cursed womb. He is surprised that they are both regarded as special grade curses when he was so easily able to defeat it. Gojo believes that the higher-ups of the Jujutsu world are causing them to be left behind, and consequently doing nothing while the opposition like Suguru Geto and Jogo are getting stronger. In addition to this, the desires of the antagonistic forces within this world are well established here. We get to learn and appreciate their desire for cursed spirits to reign supreme over the world, and for their goal to put an end to humanity. After the introduction to the cursed training arc, it begins to set out to do what it says in the title, as both Megumi and Nobara train with the second years of Jujutsu High, while Yuji learns to control cursed energy with Gojo. Yuji remembers that Gojo had told him that he was the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, and it is for this reason that he is glad that Gojo sensei is going to teach him. He realizes how weak he was, and because of his inability to switch back with Sukuna, he had almost gotten Megumi killed. So it is for this reason that he doesn't want to meet his friends again until he has gotten stronger. So in chapter 12, the basics of cursed energy are explained to both Yuji and us, as we learn the difference between utilizing cursed energy and manipulating it into a cursed technique. Gojo advises Yuji to think of cursed energy as electricity, while cursed technique can be likened to electronics. Rightfully, electricity is difficult to utilize in its rawest form, but when electricity is used to power various different electronics, then you get a variety of different uses. Most of the cursed techniques that a Jujutsu sorcerer will utilize within their skill set is thanks to their innate talent, but since Yuji has no innate talent for Jujutsu sorcery, Gojo is hoping that his body will soon learn Sukuna's cursed techniques. Gojo wants to use this time not to teach Yuji how to utilize cursed techniques, but he wants him to apply his cursed energy to his physical attacks. Yuji recalls that he had done something like this against the cursed womb. Gojo explains that cursed energy is generated through negative emotion, so every Jujutsu sorcerer has to learn how to control their emotions and their feelings, especially in regards to channeling their cursed energy. So when a situation arises and that individual is overwhelmed with emotion, it will not result in them wasting their cursed energy. Gojo states that he is going to make Yuji control his cursed energy through watching movies. Gojo ends up giving to Yuji a stuffed doll, or in other words, a cursed corpse. This doll will wake up if it doesn't receive a constant flow of cursed energy. Upon waking up, it will immediately attack Yuji. He tasks Yuji with watching various different movies that will elicit emotions like sadness, happiness, or even anger. Yuji has to get through an entire movie without waking up the stuffed doll. This very non-conventional way of training will result in Yuji being able to control the flow of its cursed energy. The trick is to maintain a constant flow of cursed energy to the stuffed doll, not too little or not too much. Gojo leaves Yuji to continue with his training, but he ends up being ambushed by the cursed spirit that we had seen earlier called Jogo. His accomplice Geto appears to know how powerful Gojo really is, but Jogo was pretty confident that he could defeat Gojo on his own. Throughout this entire battle, you could tell that the cursed spirit was frustratingly trying his very best, but in the end he was easily shrugged off by Gojo. And if you want my opinion, this is what I was waiting for since the very beginning of the story. I really wanted to see Gojo take part in a proper battle, and we finally get it within chapter 14. Gojo uses his cursed technique, which is called Limitless. It is also referred to as Reversal within the Viz translation. Through this, he is able to stop any attack that is directed towards him. He does so by utilizing the infinite space that exists between himself and the opponent. We quickly get to understand why Gojo is dubbed as the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. The minute he starts fighting back, Jogo is overwhelmed. Predicting his opponent's next move, Gojo quickly rushes to grab Yuji in order to teach him about a new Jujutsu concept. It is in chapter 15 that we are introduced to the concept of domain expansion. Sure enough, just as Gojo had predicted, the cursed spirit unleashes his domain expansion called Coffin of the Iron Mountain. Gojo explains to Yuji that a domain expansion is an environment which is created by using cursed energy, and it is manifested by utilizing that cursed energy through a cursed technique. The two main advantages of utilizing a domain expansion is that firstly, you get an increase in your own abilities, and secondly, any cursed techniques that are deployed within the domain will always hit their target. Jogo quickly realizes that he had underestimated Gojo. Here he is forced to experience the true difference in their power. Gojo then continues to explain to Yuji that the best way to counter a domain expansion is to expand one's own domain, and the individual who has the more refined domain will reign supreme. And surprisingly, it is here that Gojo activates his own domain expansion called Unlimited Void, and thus Gojo easily puts an end to this battle as he beheads beheads Jogo. This entire display leaves Yuji stunned, as he says to himself that Gojo is on a completely different level. The remains of Jogo end up being rescued by one of his accomplices, Hanami. Gojo can tell that Hanami is a high-leveled cursed spirit, as he was able to quickly retrieve Jogo while erasing his presence at the same time, making it incredibly difficult for Gojo and Yuji to stop him. Now, ordinarily it would be a matter of concern if different high-level cursed spirits were working together, but it appears that Gojo is excited by this prospect. It really does appear that Gojo is waiting for the next challenge, as he is probably bored that he can't fight against somebody on his same level. After this encounter, Gojo tells Yuji that he wants him to one day get strong enough so that he can defeat high-level curses like the one that he had just encountered. Gojo then states that for the next month, Yuji's training will be intensified, as on top of watching movies, he will be fighting against Gojo himself, and in addition to this, he will take him on difficult missions so that he can learn the basics of Jujutsu and how to use it, and all of the results of Yuji's training will be shown off at the Goodwill event. After this, we are briefly introduced to another antagonist who will play a key role within the next story arc. Of course, I am referring to the character of Mahito. It has already been established for a few chapters that they are very afraid of Gojo's abilities, so it is for this reason that they want to seal Gojo, and it is revealed within chapter 16 that on the 31st of October, they will plan to seal Gojo in Shibuya. I know I said in the last video that so much happens within such a short amount of time and Jujutsu Kaisen throws you right into the action, but I definitely wasn't expecting this. So much is going on and it makes you feel so excited to turn over the page or to read the next chapter of this story. I remember wondering when I had first read these chapters whether if Geto or Mahito had fought against Gojo in the past. Whatever the case, it appears that their immediate objectives are to seal Gojo and to take advantage of Yuji, who is the vessel of Sukuna, as their second aim is to form an alliance with Sukuna, the strongest cursed spirit. After this, we cut to Megumi and Nobara as they encounter students from the third year of Kyoto Jujutsu High. It appears that the students from the Kyoto school have come to visit for the meeting that takes place prior to the Goodwill event. We learn that the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High is one of the higher-ups of the Jujutsu world, and it is believed that he was involved with targeting Yuji, and as we know, because of the decisions made by the higher-ups, Yuji had ended up supposedly dying. The two third-year students of Kyoto Jujutsu High are introduced as Mai Zenin and Aoi Todo. They appear to be taunting Megumi and Nobara, commenting on Yuji's death, stating that he must have been a vile human for him to have been the vessel of Sukuna, even going as far as to say that Megumi and Nobara must be relieved that he is dead. Now, I'm aware that Todo is another fan favorite character, and it's pretty easy to understand after reading the end of chapter 16, when he questions Megumi on his taste of women. He has a very terrifying demeanor and a sadistic smile that all too often reminds me of Kenpachi. From the get-go, even before he takes part in battle, you can tell that he is incredibly strong. Todo states that if his answer is boring, then he will beat him to near death, but Megumi ends up stating that the only thing that he prefers in a woman is compassion. He doesn't need anything else. But of course, this answer doesn't satisfy Todo, as he immediately begins to attack Megumi, while on the other hand, the other third-year student Mai ends up fighting against Nobara. Nobara ends up comparing Mai to her sister Maki, completely aware that this will annoy her. Meanwhile, Megumi tries his best against Todo, but he is brutally beaten by him. Before Megumi has a chance to get really serious, he ends up being saved by Toge and Panda. They end up breaking up the fight, requesting for Todo to leave. Meanwhile, Mai's sister Maki arrives to assist Nobara. It appears that all of this was just a taster for what's to come at the Goodwill event. Through this brief exchange, we learn about how crazy Todo is as a character, and as well as this, we learned about the very dysfunctional relationship that exists between the Zenin sisters, as Mai is able to use cursed energy while Maki is unable to, as she relies on cursed tools in order to utilize cursed energy. She further explains her lack of innate jujutsu ability by stating that she cannot see curses if she isn't wearing her glasses. She is unable to manipulate her own cursed energy like everybody else. Nobara rightfully asks Maki why is it that she had become a jujutsu sorcerer. She states that she did so in order to piss people off. We learned that Maki was looked down upon for her lack of ability, so she wants to prove people wrong. How would the naysayers react if this individual who was looked down upon one day ended up becoming a great jujutsu sorcerer? Maki's desire to prove others wrong inspires Nobara, as I'm sure after this encounter with the Kyoto Jujutsu High students, both Megumi and Nobara will train even harder for their Goodwill event. And just before the cursed training arc wraps up, we get an exchange between Gojo and the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High. This is a very important discussion that takes place, as it helps us to understand the current conflict within the Jujutsu world, how the old generation are stifling the growth of their youth, and how Gojo wants to correct this by bringing about his own revolution. Gojo wastes little time with formalities as he he immediately asks the principal about his involvement with the death of Yuji. Gojo explains to the principal that last night they were attacked by 2 unknown special grade curses. He states that those curses were able to communicate, and Gojo bets that there are more curse spirits on this level that are out there. He states that more and more powerful students are coming out of the Jujutsu schools. Examples are given like Hakari, Okotsu, and Todo. To add to his point, he mentions that there was an incident with Suguru Geto a year ago, and as of recently, the emergence of the Vessel of Sukuna. Gojo warns the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High that the power that they have been ignoring in order to maintain their own status within the Jujutsu society and for the sake of their traditions, that very power has grown far too large, and it is very quickly approaching whether if they like it or not. We know that Sukuna had even earlier hinted that something big is going to happen, and not to mention all of the planning that Geto, Mahito, and their accomplices are doing for October 31st. Gojo states that the new generation of Jujutsu sorcerers will not be limited to just fighting against special grades, and it is for this reason that Gojo ends up warning the principal that more will rise from his ranks and will end up questioning the old higher-ups. It appears that Gojo's goal of raising very strong Jujutsu sorcerers is coming into fruition, individuals who will serve as his allies in order to fight against cursed spirits. Gojo is warning the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High that their time as rulers of the Jujutsu world is coming to an end. A new era is about to begin. After this ominous warning of an uprising or a revolution, Gojo leaves, and this brings us to an end to the cursed training arc, as at the end of chapter 18 we get some build up to the next story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the versus Mahito arc. We are taken to a cinema located within Kawasaki City, as we are told that after a movie had ended, the deformed corpses of 3 high school boys were found by theatre staff. Their cause of death is described as an increase of pressure to the brain, resulting in asphyxiation due to their cranial deformation. We then see Mahito as a boy approaches him and questions whether if he was at the movie theatre. Mahito is surprised that the boy can see him, and the chapter ends as we see Yuji being accompanied by another Jujutsu sorcerer as they go to the gruesome scene at the cinema in order to investigate. Now for the span of 9 chapters we get quite a lot that occurs here. We have several battles taking place and several revelations occurring, and along with all of this we get key characters introduced to the story. We learn about the antagonists of the Jujutsu Kaisen world, as well as being introduced to the students of Kyoto Jujutsu High. Along with all of these revelations, we are left with equally as many questions. The biggest question for me is the true motive of Sukuna. Why is it that he had changed his mind and had ended up making a binding vow with Yuji? It appears that Megumi has something to do with it, but at present we don't know anything more than this. Now another thing that this arc excels in is establishing Gojo as the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. Prior to this, it had been stated and we briefly got to see Gojo take part in battle, but Akutami does a really good job of showcasing Gojo's abilities, as well as demonstrating Gojo's domain expansion. This not only proves to Yuji but to us the reader that Gojo is indeed the strongest character within this world, and it is for this reason that the antagonistic forces are not even going to put up a fight against Gojo. They simply desire to seal him, as they know that it would be futile to battle against him. An aspect of Jujutsu Kaisen that I didn't particularly get behind during the first 2 arcs of the story was that Yuji, the main character, is unable to use cursed energy, but after reading this story arc we can see that this was purposeful for us to understand the concepts of cursed energy, cursed techniques, and domain expansions. Through Yuji being introduced to all of these new concepts and ideas, we too are introduced to them. We vicariously experience all of this through Yuji's character, and I've said this previously in the last video, but we are constantly being thrown right into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. It is a lot of information to take in, but upon reading these chapters a couple of times I really got a sense of appreciation for the characters, the way that they are introduced to us, and the dynamics of their relationships that Akutami hints to us, like the rift that has formed between Mai and Maki, and we get to appreciate Gojo's disdain for the current higher-ups of the Jujutsu world. Another aspect that you cannot help but to appreciate is the detail that Akutami goes into when it comes to the cursed energy power system. Before even getting to chapter 20, we already get to see several different domain expansions. We understand how different weaponry can be imbued with cursed energy in order to become cursed tools. We also get to appreciate a plethora of different cursed techniques, and it proves that the word of Jujutsu Kaisen has been very carefully crafted. And the most impressive thing to me is that all of this information is conveyed to us in a very fun way. With complicated concepts, it is prone for stories to explain them to us through heavy exposition, but I have not seen any of this as of yet. And the last thing that I want to touch upon is the bond that I can see that has formed between Yuji, Megumi and Nobara. In particular, the friendship that exists between Megumi and Yuji. Despite only having known Yuji for a very short amount of time, you can tell that his death has deeply impacted Megumi, and somewhat Nobara too. While Yuji is also growing and developing with Gojo, we learn that Megumi and Nobara are also undergoing their own separate training. It really makes me excited to see the fruits of their training and for them to be reunited with Yuji again, so that the three of them can utilize all of the new abilities and techniques that they have learned, through working together and overcoming even stronger opponents. Megumi's character growth is also hinted at during the Curse training arc, as we saw him questioning how he would be able to carry Curse tools with him, because if Megumi is able to combine the use of Curse tools along with his Shikigami, then he would be able to battle far more effectively. Megumi realizes during this arc that he doesn't have to carry Curse tools with him, as he can place them within his shadows that he creates, and by opening these shadows he is easily able to retrieve the different Curse tools that he has brought with him, and it's an excellent hint at the future of Megumi's character. However, at the end of this chapter, Megumi and Nobara are given a reality check by the third year students of Kyoto Jujutsu High, and this is similar to how Yuji had received his own reality check after he had witnessed Gojo taking part in battle. The three first year students of Tokyo Jujutsu High still clearly have a long way to go, as we are still at the very start of the story. So until my next Jujutsu Kaisen video, I want to know all of your thoughts on the Cursed training arc. What did you think about all of the concepts that were introduced to us here, like cursed energy, cursed techniques, domain expansions, cursed tools, and what did you think about the new characters that were introduced? And lastly, what did you think of Gojo taking part in battle? Were you as impressed as I was? Welcome to the third video in my Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis series, and in this video I'm going over the fourth story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Versus Mahito arc. Like the previous story arcs that I have covered, a lot takes place within the Versus Mahito arc. Not only are we properly introduced to the antagonist Mahito, we are also introduced to two key characters. Firstly, the grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer Kento Nanami, and secondly, a student that Yuji forms a friendship with called Junpei Yoshino. Up until now, we have had a lot of action taking place within the story. But what sets this story arc apart from what we have seen so far is the emotional rollercoaster that we are taking on. The Versus Mahito arc focuses on the tragic life of Junpei, and how in his final days he is manipulated by the special grade curse spirit Mahito, who this arc is named after. Following the trail of Mahito's sinister acts are Yuji and Nanami. This investigation that Yuji undertakes forces him to utilize all of the training that he has learned with Gojo. But not only this, it forces him to come to terms with the prospect of not being able to save everybody. We know that Yuji wants to prevent people from dying at the hands of curses. This is because he desires for people to die natural deaths, and for them to be surrounded by people that they love. Dying at the hands of a curse spirit is anything but natural, and the victims of curse spirits in their final moments are filled with fear, and they are far from being surrounded with their loved ones. So I'm going to go into the various events that occur within this story arc, including the investigation undertaken by Yuji and Nanami, as well as the friendship that forms between Junpei and Yuji, as well as this going over the various battles that take place during this arc, including the battle between Nanami and Mahito, and towards the end of the arc, Yuji and Nanami working together in order to battle against Mahito. So join me as I go over the heartbreaking Versus Mahito arc. This fourth story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen takes place between chapters 19 to 31 of the manga, and is adapted into episodes 9 to 13 of the anime. Most people, including myself, had really fallen in love with Jujutsu Kaisen by this point within the story, and when people usually ask when does a series get good, then I would easily say that it's during the Versus Mahito arc for Jujutsu Kaisen. This arc begins with a monologue from this newly introduced character called Junpei, as he says to himself that if he had a button to kill people that he didn't like, then he would hesitate to press it, but if he had a button to kill people who didn't like him, then he would press it without any second thoughts. It appears that Junpei is sat at the back of the cinema observing some students who are sat towards the front. It appears that all of them, including Junpei, are skipping school in order to watch a movie. We learn from a brief flashback that these students had been bullying Junpei, while at the theater screen Junpei witnesses Mahito disfiguring the three students. Without any fear or hesitation, Junpei follows Mahito, questioning if it is possible for him to do what he just did. We get to learn from these few pages that Junpei is kind-hearted, kind-hearted. You can infer this from his desire to not to want bad to happen to those that he even hates, but because of the cruelty that he is made to undergo from the bullying at school, he feels no remorse for those individuals who hate him. And I believe that this is the reason why he asks Mahito if he can learn how to disfigure humans. He wouldn't think twice to disfigure them if he had learned that they hated him. We are then introduced to the grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer Kento Nanami, as he and Yuji are following the residual cursed energy left behind the culprit who had disfigured the 3 students. Nanami is very stern and upright. He doesn't entertain Yuji's jokes and his lively, excitable behavior. We learn that Nanami was a former office worker, now turned Jujutsu sorcerer. Nanami had studied at Jujutsu High, but he had left the Jujutsu world after realizing that sorcerers are idiots. But he had realized that office workers are idiotic also. So in the end, he had returned to the world of Jujutsu sorcery, picking the lesser of the 2 evils. We can gather that Nanami is very strict and he follows the rules, and he doesn't particularly like the way that Gojo goes about things. He is clearly referencing the faith that Gojo appears to have in Yuji, Sukuna's vessel. Nanami states that it is for this reason that he doesn't recognize Yuji as a Jujutsu sorcerer. He tells Yuji that he needs to prove himself that he can be useful, despite the fact that he has the curse of Sukuna within him. Right at the start of this arc, Yuji affirms that he is going to prove Nanami wrong, through showing him just how useful he can be. After investigating the surroundings of the crime scene, they discover 2 cursed spirits on the rooftop of the cinema. Nanami clearly underestimates Yuji. He states that Yuji is a child and as an adult he has an obligation to look after him. During chapter 20, we get a description of the ability that Nanami utilizes, and in addition to this, we get to learn about a new technique that Yuji had developed during his training with Gojo. Nanami describes this technique as forcibly creating a weak point on his opponent. His ability allows him to divide his opponent into tenths, and if he is able to strike the enemy at the weak point that is generated, then it will result in a critical hit. Yuji questions why Nanami had just revealed his ability, as this can be considered a weakness. This can easily disadvantage you, especially if your enemy knows how your technique works. But Nanami explains there are such techniques that are not affected if they are revealed to enemies. He explains this strategy of misleading by revealing, as he reveals the benefits of revealing one's hand and the rules that it initiates. Within the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, we learn that sometimes revealing your technique results in it becoming more effective. Nanami demonstrates this as he easily takes out the cursed spirit in front of him. He had defeated his opponent with a wrapped blade, and in addition to this, he had striked the cursed spirit with the back of the blade. You would have assumed that Nanami's attack would be unable to cut through the cursed spirit, but he easily severs its limbs with a dull blade. And this is thanks to Nanami's ability called the ratio technique. Immediately after this, Yuji demonstrates his own newly learned ability called Divergent Fist. We get a brief flashback to Yuji's training with Gojo, as he tells him that his cursed energy has a delay. Yuji's cursed energy cannot keep up with his speed. This results in a unique flow of cursed energy, as after Yuji punches a target, it results in a second attack occurring, where the cursed energy flows into its opponents right after he makes contact. This means that one punch will deal 2 devastating blows. Nanami quickly understands the potential that Yuji possesses, as he thinks to himself that if Yuji is able to combine his full physical strength with a cursed technique, then the results will be highly effective. He now knows why Gojo has taken a liking to Yuji. After the battle is concluded, Nanami notices that what they have been fighting against haven't been cursed spirits, but in fact they have been fighting against humans whose bodies have been transfigured using cursed energy. The corpses of these ex-humans are examined by Dr. Shoko, and she reassures a concerned Yuji that it wasn't because of him that these transfigured humans ended up dying. The cause of death was due to disfiguration. Yuji still appears to feel guilty, but Shoko tells him not to feel guilt because he didn't kill them. Yuji is truly shaken at the prospect that he had dealt harm to another human being. Even Nanami notes how upset Yuji is after learning that other people have died. After this incident, they learn that the residual cursed energy was purposefully left there for them to be guided to the rooftop of the cinema and to find those disfigured humans. Realizing that this matter won't be taken care of so easily, Yuji and Nanami resolve to get to the bottom of it. Meanwhile, the culprit behind the disfigurations has taken the young Junpei to his lair. He explains to him the nature of cursed spirits and how they are created, while also revealing that he himself was born thanks to the hatred that is created between people. While Junpei is in Mahito's lair, we get to see the various experiments that he is doing on human beings. He ends up having very frank discussions with Mahito and opens up to him. He tells him that he knows how evil people can be, so it is for this reason that he doesn't expect anything from anybody, and this is why when he sees another person's corpse it means nothing to him. He is indifferent to it. He believes that this is what human beings should strive for, this indifference. Mahito also explains to us how his abilities work, as we understand that he can manipulate the composition of one's soul. Their conversation concludes with Mahito encouraging Junpei, stating that he supports everything that Junpei represents. Mahito is clearly taking advantage of a troubled teenager and telling him what whatever he wants to hear. But for what purpose? We don't really know what Mahito is seeking to gain from manipulating Junpei. But one thing that we are certain of is that no good can come from his interactions with his special grade cursed spirit. The investigation continues with Nanami trying to locate the hideout of the individual who disfigured those students, while Yuji and Ijichi are tasked to investigate Junpei. After Yuji leaves the room, it is revealed that Nanami knows exactly where Mahito's lair is. He doesn't want to risk putting Yuji in danger. After all, he's still a child. You can tell despite Nanami's cold outer shell, he has a kind heart, and he is considerate at least towards his underlings. During chapter 21, we also get an explanation as to what grade level sorcerers should be when they're up against various different cursed spirits of different levels. Ijichi explains to Yuji that a grade 2 sorcerer is supposed to win against a grade 2 spirit, and that a grade 2 sorcerer is close to the skill level of a grade 1 curse. This means that a sorcerer of any graded level will always be stronger than a cursed spirit of its same level. The only exception to this occurs when special graded sorcerers are matched up against special graded cursed spirits. Their power levels are much harder to comprehend and quantify. Thus, a special graded sorcerer is expected to be able to defeat every level of a cursed spirit. At the end of chapter 21, we see that Nanami has arrived within Mahito's lair. After defeating several transfigured humans, Mahito reveals himself. Nanami, not having forgotten his days of working overtime at the office, does not want to do the same here, so he immediately attacks Mahito. He successfully breaks his opponent's guard, pushing the cursed spirit back and then activating his ratio technique. Through this, he is able to sever the right forearm of Mahito, but it is quickly revealed to us that Mahito has the ability to heal himself. He is able to do this thanks to his powers of being able to reshape souls, including his own. During this battle, Nanami is surprised to have encountered a cursed spirit who is able to hold a conversation. After Mahito reveals that his cursed technique can touch and reshape the soul, he demonstrates how he can make humans small and store them for later use, but also complains that humans die usually after being transfigured, so he wonders what it would be like to transfigure a Jujutsu sorcerer. But Nanami has little time to waste, as he states that he had started work at 10 and it's 5:30 now, and whatever it takes he's going to be clocking out by 6, so he doesn't have time to waste with Mahito. Meanwhile, Yuji makes the acquaintance of Junpei by stealing the trousers of a teacher that was talking to him. When I'd first read this, it definitely got a laugh out of me because it came out of nowhere. The teacher's begging for Yuji to return, but he's focused and runs away with his pants. Yuji quickly gains Junpei's attention after he explains that he took the teacher's trousers because he was aware that Junpei didn't like his teacher. From this exchange and what we have seen of Yuji's character, you can tell that he is very understanding. He is able to understand individuals who are misunderstood by society as a large, and this is why Junpei is able to easily get along with Yuji's non-judgmental attitude. We then cut back to Nanami's battle with Mahito. As the time has just gone past 6 o'clock and he is unfortunately working overtime now, Mahito's technique is incredibly disturbing, as it is made apparent that the humans that he disfigures still have consciousness. He uses several disfigured humans to battle against Nanami, and in some instances they call out to Nanami for help. But remembering a conversation with Dr. Shoko from earlier, it is made apparent that once a human has been disfigured, they cannot be helped. The best thing to do is to kill the disfigured human for their own sake. When it comes to Nanami's character, there is a lot of reading between the lines. It is apparent that seeing the suffering of the disfigured human wavers Nanami's soul, and Mahito even picks up on this. And it is because of Nanami being emotionally affected by this disfigured human's plight that the tide of the battle turns. Just moments before Nanami having to work overtime, Mahito had taken the upper hand in the battle. He was successfully able to injure Nanami by touching his soul, but the reason why Nanami's body wasn't disfigured and he didn't become a pawn to Mahito was because he was subconsciously protecting his soul with his cursed energy. But it doesn't bother Mahito because he is confident that he only has to touch his soul 2 or 3 more times for him to no longer be a human. After Nanami begins working overtime, his cursed energy begins to increase. Mahito deduces that Nanami had been restricting himself based upon time restraints. Up until now, he was limiting the power that he was releasing. He then goes on to explain his ratio technique to Mahito, as he describes it as a cursed technique that can divide an opponent with lines into several sections, and at the same time it forcibly creates a weak spot in one of the sections. Mahito, of course, is surprised that he is revealing how his technique works, but we are aware that revealing one's technique can result in it becoming much stronger through the explanation that we got earlier on in the story. In order to defeat Mahito, Nanami has 2 options. Either he continues to deal damage until the cursed spirit runs out of cursed energy, which is a very unlikely option, or secondly, he can completely destroy Mahito with a single strike. So he uses his ability Ratio Technique Collapse. However, it misses Mahito and instead
instead destroys his lair. Just before leaving, Nanami strikes Mahito's leg, and as his lair begins to implode onto him, Nanami is aware that this isn't enough to defeat Mahito, and he says that they will meet again if they are both still alive by then. The Grade 1 sorcerer ends their confrontation by escaping from Mahito's crumbling lair. This entire exchange was very fascinating as it occurred between two high-level individuals. We got to see the high-level abilities of a Jujutsu sorcerer while also experiencing one of the best special grade curse spirits taking part in battle. It was a constant back and forth during this fight which kept me on the edge of my seat. There were occasions where Mahito had the upper hand, and equally as many scenarios where Nanami appeared to have the upper hand. One thing was for certain, the way that this battle was written, Akutami made sure that one individual did not appear stronger than the other, and it is for this reason that this whole fight had an air of unpredictability. Not being able to predict or know the outcome of the battle makes you feel more invested in its outcome, and Jujutsu Kaisen, similar to Hunter x Hunter, is able to successfully do this. And after having read so many different shonen stories, I can tell that Jujutsu Kaisen is an excellent series only by chapter 23. You can tell that the author knows exactly what he is doing, and he's playing to his strengths. And if you want to know why Jujutsu Kaisen is such a great battle shonen, then you need to look no further than the battle between Nanami and Mahito. We had everything from taunting to intricate techniques to making your opponent waver emotionally, well-explained power-ups, and healing abilities that didn't sound contrived or convoluted. After this battle occurs, we get some bonding time between Yuji and Junpei. They do initially appear to have some differences, but they end up bonding over their shared love of movies. While they are talking to each other, we see Suguru Geto walking past them, as it appears that befriending Junpei was a way for them to get closer to Sukuna's vessel. After bonding over movies and exchanging numbers, they are eventually found by Junpei's mother, who invites Yuji over for dinner. You can tell that Junpei is very close to his mother and cares a lot for her, as he scolds her for smoking. We then see that Mahito has recovered from his battle with Nanami, and it appears that he is excited to fight against the Jujutsu sorcerer once again, while Nanami, who is tending to his wounds, is fearful that the cursed spirit that he had just faced off against may become much stronger than he is now, growing to a point where Jujutsu sorcerers will not be able to handle him. Yuji appears to have a pleasant dinner with Junpei and his mother, as they all share a lot of laughs with each other. Junpei's mother eventually falls asleep, as Yuji describes her as a good person. We then get a flashback of Junpei's mother telling him that he doesn't have to go to school if he doesn't want to, and this is obviously in response to all of the bullying that Junpei was experiencing. She had explained to him that school is just one small fish tank, and there are many other tanks out there. When Junpei asks about Yuji's parents, it is here that we learn that Yuji had never met his mother, and he can barely remember his father. The only family that he did have was his grandfather. Just as Yuji is about to leave, Junpei asks him that has he ever killed somebody as a Jujutsu sorcerer. He asks Yuji what he would do if he had no choice but to kill somebody. Yuji responds by stating that he would rather not kill if it were possible, but Junpei questions why he wouldn't kill an evil person. Yuji is aware that as a Jujutsu sorcerer, one day the choice of killing will be presented to him. Yuji is worried that if he begins to question the value of life, especially when he is up against an evil individual, then he is also fearful that maybe the lives of those people who are important to him will also become vague. He is fearful of losing this value that he holds to life, and it is for this reason that Yuji would prefer not to even kill evil individuals. That night, after Yuji leaves, Junpei thinks to himself that he had once assumed that people don't have hearts, and he was saved by those words. He was ultimately given power by Mahito thanks to those words. But after speaking to Yuji and thinking of his mother, he tells himself that if killing somebody means that his soul will be tainted, then he would choose not to kill. This is of course prior to the tragic events that are about to unfold. Junpei's mother ends up waking up from her sleep, and she notices that a strange finger has been placed in front of her. We can identify this finger as one of Sukuna's fingers. We are left to wonder how on earth did one of Sukuna's fingers end up within Junpei's home. Cursed spirits begin to be drawn to the finger while Junpei's mother is holding it. These very cursed spirits end up murdering her. We are not explicitly shown how she had died, but at the start of chapter 25, we get a description of how her corpse was found. The report states that the dead body of Junpei's mother was found at his home along with one of Sukuna's fingers. Junpei's mother was believed to have been killed by one of the cursed spirits that was drawn to the finger. Her body was found severed as it was missing its bottom half. No visible evidence of blood was found at the crime scene, and disturbingly, the remaining top half of her body was found in a bed stuffed with an enormous amount of ice packs. After the death of Junpei's mother, he is approached by Mahito, who explains to him that the cursed object that they found within their home attracts curses. He asks Mahito what was this doing in his home. Mahito manipulates Junpei and tells him that somebody had implanted the cursed object within his home because they had resented Junpei or his mother. After being influenced by Mahito, he begins to assume that one of his old classmates who had previously bullied him had planted the cursed object within his home. The student that Junpei targets is being recognized at a ceremony within his school. Mahito ends up creating a curtain outside of the school while Junpei interrupts the ceremony. It appears that Mahito and Geto appear to be using Junpei in order to force Yuji into making a binding vow with Sukuna. Junpei appears to have knocked out all of the students within the school as he approaches his target. The student called Shota had previously bullied Junpei and had even left a scar on his face after burning him with boiling water. Junpei continues his assault on Shota as he tells him that he is going to die no matter what he says. Just as Shota apologizes to Junpei, it appears that he has lost all sense of reason as he doesn't accept his apology and simply says so what to it. Yuji interrupts Junpei's assault and questions what on earth he is doing. Junpei, who appears to be a totally different character here, tells Yuji to stay out of this. His entire demeanor is so cold and apathetic, completely different to the individual that Yuji had befriended only the day before. Junpei summons a jellyfish-like Shikigami. He doesn't refer to Yuji by his name, he instead refers to him as a Jujutsu sorcerer, clearly distancing himself as much as he can with Yuji, and the way that he is saying it appears to be in a negative connotation, proving that Mahito's manipulation was successful, and he has even developed a hatred for Jujutsu sorcerers. Junpei tells Yuji that this situation has nothing to do with him, but Yuji isn't willing to back down. He fights back Junpei's Shikigami while trying to get through to him, pleading with him not to throw his life away. But at this point, after everything that he has experienced, Junpei is convinced that people don't have hearts, and he believes that Yuji is only pretending to be compassionate. But Yuji isn't convinced by Junpei's words, as he believes that they are a desperate attempt to hide the pain that Junpei is feeling. He successfully overpowers him by attacking Junpei himself rather than his Shikigami. After this, he finally opens up to Yuji, as he finds it difficult to believe that people have hearts, especially after knowing that somebody had cursed his mother. He breaks down into tears, giving in to his emotions after the loss of his mother. He attacks Yuji a final time with his Shikigami, but Yuji doesn't dodge the attack. He approaches a tearful Junpei as he promises him that they are going to find out who cursed his mother. When he feels like he is completely alone and nobody understands him, Yuji says that he is going to be there for him. He will listen to him. After hearing about what had happened to his mother, Yuji invites Junpei to Jujutsu High, stating that there are teachers there who are incredibly strong and he will be able to make friends that he can trust, and together they can put a stop to the individual who had cursed his mother. But just as Yuji tells Junpei to fight alongside him, Mahito appears out of nowhere, and so begins one of my favorite chapters that I have ever read within this series. Chapter 27 is one of the most heartbreaking portions of this story. Mahito ends up pinning down Yuji as Junpei realizes Mahito wasn't a good person. Just as Yuji had gotten through to Junpei's heart and had offered him a dream of joining Jujutsu High along with him, Mahito appears and transfigures Junpei's body. The transfigured Junpei is ordered by Mahito to attack Yuji. Yuji, holding back his friend, tells him that he is going to help him. He calls upon Sukuna for help, telling him that he'll do whatever he wants. He pleads with Sukuna to help Junpei, but Sukuna refuses. Both Sukuna and Mahito begin laughing at Yuji's expense. This happens while Junpei dies in Yuji's arms, and in all honesty, I cannot remember another series that has made its protagonist go through so much turmoil within just 27 chapters. Seeing the distorted, maniacal faces of Sukuna and Mahito laughing while Yuji stares in shock, this panel has to be one of the best panels that I've ever seen within any manga, and it's enough to make you feel the hopelessness that Yuji must be feeling right now. At this moment, while he is being laughed at, Yuji realizes that he had almost forgotten that these individuals he is facing off against are curses. After Junpei dies, Yuji goes on the offensive as he immediately punches Mahito in the face. Somehow, Yuji was able to strike Mahito's soul. After accepting that his enemies are not human, Yuji declares that he is going to kill Mahito. The pure hatred that Yuji is feeling in this moment makes him feel like everything that he has said up until now has been a complete lie, especially after declaring that he is going to kill Mahito. You can see that the conversation that Yuji was having with Junpei earlier on about what he would do if he was presented with the choice of killing an individual is followed up here. Previously, Yuji had given a very self-righteous response, but in the heat of the moment and the raw emotion of the situation results in Yuji declaring that he is going to kill his opponent. Mahito even corrects him after he makes his declaration, questioning if he meant that he is going to exercise him instead of kill him. Mahito then desires to target every single student within the school, wanting to enrage Yuji so that he is left with no other choice but to make a binding vow with Sukuna. The whole purpose of this is so that Mahito can win Sukuna over to fight on their side. Their battle begins as an enraged Yuji fights throughout the school, but it is evident that Mahito has the upper hand, especially after piercing Yuji's body with spikes. But just as Mahito is about to defeat Yuji by touching his soul, he is stopped by Sukuna. He warns him not to attempt to touch his soul ever again, and that he should know his place. Thanks to Sukuna's interruption, Yuji is able to fight back, but despite this, Mahito is still able to appear behind Yuji and is about to attack him until Yuji is saved by Nanami. After Nanami realizes that Yuji is able to actually hurt Mahito, they devise a plan together. They unleash a relentless barrage of attacks onto Mahito as they desperately try to create openings for each other. Mahito attempts to pin down Nanami while distracting Yuji by fighting disfigured humans. He had assumed that Yuji wouldn't have the the heart to kill a human even if it was a transfigured one, but he was wrong as Yuji defeats the contorted humans and returns to save Nanami. Yuji's desire to help people is constantly being put to the test, and he's being put in very difficult situations, as well as his desire to ensure that people die a natural death is being pushed to its very limits. What can he do if he is facing off against a human that has been deformed and is pleading for Yuji to end its existence? All that Yuji can do is direct all of his anger and his pain towards the one who had caused all this to happen. After both Yuji and Nanami counterattack and continuously attack Mahito, he is left with no choice but to unleash his own domain expansion. It appears that Mahito had only brought Nanami into his domain. He begins to accept that he has no way out of this situation as Nanami believes that he is going to be defeated. And it is here that we get a brief flashback which explains why Nanami had decided to rejoin Jujutsu High. Nanami had regularly been going to a bakery for lunch. He had noticed that the girl at the counter who serves him has a cursed spirit that is attached to her. He tells himself that it should be fine if he leaves it alone because he doesn't want to be mistaken for some sort of an exorcist if he attempts to help her. We get an insight into the job that Nanami had been doing as he was trading in stocks and shares. His higher-ups had been so focused on making profits. Nanami's desire was to make enough money so that he could retire by 40 and move to the countryside so that he could live out the rest of his life in peace. During this flashback, it's been about 4 years since he had left Jujutsu High, and in that entire time the only thing that he was focused upon was money. During those 4 years, he didn't have to deal with curses or even interact with other people. He didn't care as long as he had money. After returning to the bakery and speaking to the girl at the counter, she tells him that her shoulders have been feeling really tight and that she can barely sleep. Nanami thinks to himself that his day-to-day work involves taking care of rich people's money and helping them to become richer. This work doesn't really make much of a difference to the world, but he realizes that this girl who is working in the bakery but is making nowhere near enough money as he is offering to people a great service. If bakeries didn't exist, then what would people do if they had wanted to eat bread? At the bakery, Nanami had realized his purpose in life. He helps the girl at the bakery by destroying the cursed spirit that is bothering her. She immediately begins to feel relief as she thanks Nanami, and it was at this moment that he had decided to quit his job and to rejoin Jujutsu High, realizing that his purpose was to assist others by freeing them from the problems of cursed spirits, instead of focusing solely on making money. Just as Nanami accepts his death and he feels that he has no regrets, Yuji breaks through the domain expansion. By Yuji entering into Mahito's domain, it results in Sukuna's soul once again making contact with Mahito, and this of course irritates Sukuna. He had already told Mahito that this should not have happened a second time. It results in Sukuna cutting down Mahito and injuring him. Immediately after this attack, Mahito's domain expansion ceases to exist and the battle ends. At the end of chapter 30, we get some insight into Sukuna, as it is stated that Sukuna has no concern for anybody but himself. He exists purely for leisure. For Ryomin Sukuna, it doesn't matter whether if Nanami or Mahito survive. The only person that Sukuna is interested in is Megumi. Aside from him, he truly doesn't care about anyone else. In chapter 31, the final chapter of the versus Mahito arc, just as Mahito is about to be finished off, he is able to escape. Yuji falls unconscious and we next see them when they return to base and they are tending to their wounds. Yuji questions if Nanami is going to lecture him, but he tells him that he is in no position to lecture somebody who had saved his life. He is appreciative of Yuji's persistence, because it is thanks to him that he is alive. At the end of this arc, Yuji appears to be deeply affected by the fact that he had killed people today. He is aware that people die and there's no way to avoid death, but Yuji is still adamant that people should be able to at least die a natural death. This is at least what he used to believe. Yuji had always thought about stopping others from killing, but now that he has killed himself, he isn't sure what it means to die a natural death. Nanami advises Yuji that life isn't as simple as people being good or evil, and death comes to all of us in different ways. He advises Yuji not to try to make sure that everybody dies a natural death, because this just sounds exhausting. But he realizes that no matter what he says, Yuji will continue on with his desire. But Nanami requests for him not to die because of his desire. He tells him that just like how he had needed Yuji to save him today, there will be others who will rely on him in the future. Yuji is a very important individual, because he is after all a Jujutsu sorcerer. Nanami, now having acknowledged Yuji as a Jujutsu sorcerer, is in reference to right at the start of this arc, where he had adamantly stated that he doesn't recognize Yuji as a Jujutsu sorcerer. As the versus Mahito arc wraps up, we see that Mahito is recovering underground, and he desires to destroy Yuji's spirit once and for all, and he is confident that the age of curses is about to begin. Mahito was inspired after witnessing Sukuna, as he is reassured that curses will become the dominant different species as long as forces like Sukuna exist. Meanwhile, Yuji, who still holds hatred for what Mahito did, swears to himself that he will never lose again. Although he doesn't know what it means to die a natural death, he is adamant to continue moving forward until he does find out, and until he does kill Mahito. I think that we can all agree that the story of Jujutsu Kaisen up until the start of the versus Mahito arc was incredible, but I do believe that during the versus Mahito arc, Jujutsu Kaisen just takes everything to another level. This arc properly introduces us to three characters who play a significant role within this story. The first being Nanami, who had left the world of Jujutsu sorcery, but after aimlessly pursuing money, he had once again discovered his purpose and had rejoined Jujutsu High. He is aware that he has been gifted with the abilities of a Jujutsu sorcerer, and he knows that he needs to utilize these for good. His character had reformed to the extent that he was accepting of his own death, while he was trapped within Mahito's domain expansion. He had felt that he could die without any regret, and this is because he had left his mundane office life in order to pursue a more fulfilling life as a Jujutsu sorcerer, despite all of the risks that are associated with it. As the story progresses, we continue to be familiarized with the character of Nanami, and let me tell you, he is definitely a character that grows on you, especially after every appearance and battle that he takes part in. Prior to this story arc, we were introduced to the character of Mahito, but of course we really got to know him after this arc that was titled after him. The majority of the cursed spirits that we see Yuji and the others battle against are typically mindless, and they are not aware or conscious of their actions. But Mahito is a special grade curse who is working within a group that desires for cursed spirits to dominate over humans. We see the lengths that a cursed spirit is willing to go to in order to oppress a human being, especially through Mahito's relationship with Junpei. Despite knowing everything that Junpei has gone through, he ends up manipulating the boy, reinforcing his negative outlook on the world and his belief that humans don't have hearts. Mahito definitely didn't have any remorse, and in the end he even insulted Junpei, stating that he was no better than the people that he looked down upon. He was just as idiotic as those humans that he believed were heartless. Mahito had no limit to the lengths that he would go through in order to fulfill his purpose, and it is for this reason that he leaves a very lasting impression with us as an antagonistic force that is not to be underestimated. Akutami does an excellent job of introducing this character and making us feel hatred towards him, and he does an especially good job of explaining his group's larger purpose of sealing Gojo and forming a partnership with Sukuna. The last significant character that I want to talk about that features heavily within this story arc is of course the character of Junpei. His death was so impactful that anime only fans for a while were in denial and had believed that Junpei would return later on within the story. We even had Studio Mappa teasing us of an imaginary scene where Junpei did indeed join Jujutsu High, and he is seen to be sat with Yuji and the others alive and well. It definitely adds more salt to the wound, and I remember when this image was uploaded to Reddit and people were commenting pretending that Junpei was still alive, stating that he was a great addition to the cast, and making up scenarios of where Junpei would meet the second years of Jujutsu High, and within the most recent arc of the manga he would have revenge on Mahito and would battle against him. I love seeing community interactions like this, and Jujutsu Kaisen has a very dedicated fanbase, and experiencing the series with a larger group of people who enjoy it as much as you do definitely makes the experience of reading weekly manga a lot more enjoyable, and it takes me back to the days when the big three were being published each week and there would be a buzz after each new chapter was released of Bleach, Naruto and One Piece. But getting back onto the point, Junpei's character definitely resonated with a lot of us. I don't know about you, but I could relate to a lot of the situations that Junpei had gone through, especially when it came to bullying or feeling like you were left out within school. The only source of happiness that Junpei had was returning home to his mother, and I feel like after he was made to experience the death of his mother, something snapped within Junpei's character, and he had lost all faith in humanity. As painful as all of these experiences were for Junpei's character, it made for fascinating viewing, as we saw the gradual shift in Junpei's views of what he believes the human life to be worth. And this is perfectly juxtaposed with Yuji's beliefs about the worth of a life, and it is sadly at the expense of Junpei's character that Yuji is given very necessary character growth, as his idealistic goal of wanting people to die a natural death is crushed by the cruelty of reality. Junpei was somebody who Yuji had formed a friendship with, and it is certainly somebody who he didn't want to lose. He cared about him and wanted him to see a different outlook on life, a life where you do have friends, a life where the teachers do understand you, and a life where you are not misunderstood. Tragically, Junpei never got to experience any of this, and he only had a taste of it thanks to Yuji's friendship. After the death of Junpei, Yuji is left with a lot of questions for himself. What does it mean for an individual to die a natural death? What will he do if he is faced with the choice of killing an individual once again? And how does he feel now that he was forced to take the lives of humans who were disfigured by Mahito? These are the tragic consequences of leading a life as a Jujutsu sorcerer. After Junpei's death, Yuji now understandably has an intense hatred for Mahito. What will Yuji do if he encounters Mahito again? At the end of this arc, we are left with a lot of questions, and now the news that Yuji is still alive is going to be shared with the other students of Jujutsu High. I'm really fascinated to see how the story continues.
Welcome to the 4th video in my Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis series, and in this video we're going over the Kyoto Goodwill event arc. Up until now, this is the longest story arc that we have covered. It involves our protagonist Yuji making his return after going through extensive training with Gojo. After being reacquainted with the students of Tokyo Jujutsu High, we are thrown straight into the Kyoto Goodwill event. So much happens within this story arc. We have the battle between the two schools, as well as a sinister plot that has been hatched behind everybody's backs, which involves the 2nd and 3rd years of Kyoto Jujutsu High, as they've been ordered to kill Yuji during the team battle portion of the Kyoto Goodwill event. In addition to this fierce competition that is taking place between these two schools, the Goodwill event is invaded by one of the antagonists of the story. So in this video, my aim is to go through the key moments of this story arc, talking about some of the new characters that are introduced, as well as going over the key battles that take place during this arc, and wrapping up by speaking about the impact that this arc has on future storylines and the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. So my besto friendo, without further delay, let's get into the analysis of the Kyoto Goodwill event arc. The Kyoto Goodwill event arc takes place between chapters 32 to 54 and is adapted into episodes 14 to 21 of the anime. Its storyline revolves around the 30th annual Kyoto Sister School Goodwill event. This annual event sees the two schools pitted against each other in a series of intensive jujutsu battles. The majority of this arc is focused upon the team battle portion of this event. It is safe to say that this arc is split up into two key portions, the first being the team battles that take place between the two schools, which occur between chapters 32 to 42, and the second half of this arc focusing on when the antagonists invade the Goodwill event. During the first half of this arc, we see several students facing off against each other in one-to-one battles, while the second half sees the students of Tokyo and Kyoto Jujutsu High working together in order to battle against the cursed spirit Hanami. The fallout after the versus Mahito arc involves Mahito telling his comrades that he has developed a rivalry with the vessel of Sukuna. As well as this, Gojo learns about everything that had happened during this arc from Nanami, and he assumes that having Yuji take part in the Goodwill event will be a nice way to cheer him up. In chapter 32, Gojo surprises everybody by revealing that Yuji is still alive. While the two of them had assumed that this would be a pleasant surprise for everybody, Megumi and Nobara instead react by being horrified, because they had genuinely thought that Yuji was dead. However, nobody is more surprised about Yuji being alive than the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High. So while the Tokyo team regroup and rethink Yuji into their game plan, on the other hand, the Kyoto students are ordered to kill Yuji. Everybody seems to be in agreement with this plan aside from the powerful Aoi Todo, who disagrees with the principal's plans to assassinate Yuji. When the team battles begin, Todo goes after the Tokyo team, and Yuji is tasked with fending him off, as Megumi had mentioned earlier that Yuji's involvement will be essential to their strategy, especially in a hand-to-hand combat situation. So while the Kyoto and Tokyo students begin their search for the targeted Grade 2 cursed spirit, Yuji and Aoi Todo begin their battle, with Todo completely overwhelming Yuji. This cements the fact that he has incredible skill and power. Yuji, however, is able to endure Todo's attacks. Thus impressing him, he goes on to question Yuji about his taste in women. When it is revealed that Yuji has a similar taste in women to Todo, he quickly begins to generate false memories within his mind. Memories where the two of them are best friends and they had attended the same middle school, thus starting Todo's fascination with Yuji as his besto friendo. The two of them are eventually interrupted when students from the Kyoto school begin to ambush Yuji. However, Todo utilizes his curse techniques in order to ruin his teammates' plans to kill Yuji. His intervention results in the Kyoto students retreating, as he effectively ends up saving Yuji. As the students begin to be split up, from chapter 35, the one-to-one battles between the groups begin, as Megumi faces off against Noritoshi and Maki faces off against Kazumi. The two of them question Kazumi and Noritoshi, whether if the Kyoto team is trying to kill Yuji. While this is going on, Nobara ends up facing off against Momo, while the two cursed corpses, Panda and Mekamaru, battle against each other. In chapter 36, while the Kyoto and Tokyo students are beginning their battles, Todo expresses to Yuji that he is impressed with his raw strength and speed, but he feels that Yuji's jujutsu abilities are very unrefined. This leads to Todo challenging Yuji to grow stronger. His desire is completely in line with Yuji's desire to never accept being weak. While continuing their fight, Yuji begins to develop his abilities. He further advances thanks to the guidance of Todo, who ends up teaching him about the basics of cursed energy and how he can take advantage of it by allowing it to flow across his body. Yuji finds a mentor in Todo as he listens to his advice and decides to go down the path of the strongest. So the first solo battle that we'll talk about is the fight against Mechamaru and Panda. During this battle, we learn that Mechamaru is being controlled remotely by a terminally ill sorcerer, while contrastingly, Panda is a cursed corpse who was created by the principal of Tokyo Jujutsu High. Mechamaru has a hatred for Panda because he is able to live carefree while he suffers on the other hand. While Mechamaru tries his best and unleashes every one of his attacks against Panda, the second year Jujutsu High student is able to persist. Towards the end of the battle, when Mechamaru utilizes his ultimate cannon, Panda is left with no choice but to activate his gorilla mode. This results in a switch occurring in his cursed energy core as he utilizes the strength of his brother. This grants Panda an incredible amount of strength, and through utilizing his gorilla mode, he is able to defeat Mechamaru. At the end of the battle, Panda has no hard feelings against Mechamaru, and he hopes to meet him again one day. In chapter 39, we catch up with Maki facing off against Kasumi, as the Kyoto student learns that Maki's grade 4 sorcerer ranking does not reflect her abilities at all. Maki is able to overpower her opponent and ends up taking her cursed tool. Meanwhile, Nobara begins her battle with the airborne Momo. While in the air, Momo is completely out of range from Nobara's attacks. But however, thanks to Nobara's straw doll technique, she gains the upper hand, as it results in the Kyoto student falling to the ground. Nobara is about to defeat Momo until she is interrupted by the arrival of Mai, who fires a rubber bullet to Nobara's head. Mai is too interrupted by the arrival of her sister Maki. The twin sisters begin their battle against each other in chapter 42, as we get to understand the complex dynamic that exists between the two of them, including their traumatic childhoods, how they'd stuck by each other, and eventually how the two of them had grown distant, leading up to their encounter during the Goodwill event, where we see that Mai has developed a hatred for her sister Maki. A distance between the two sisters was formed after Maki had promised to never leave her sister's side, since the two of them had been treated wrongfully by the Zenin family during their childhood. But despite their shared trauma that they had experienced, Maki had eventually left her sister in order to explore her own desires. After being left alone, Mai was left with no choice but to become stronger also, Maki being born with talent for being a Jujutsu sorcerer, while on the other hand, Mai, who did have cursed energy, had no desire to grow stronger. She did not have anything to prove, as she was born with cursed energy while Maki wasn't. But after being left with nobody to be there for her, Mai was robbed of the opportunity to live a noble life, as she started to pursue her own path of becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer. During this time, Mai had started to resent Maki, even going as far as to hide her cursed techniques from her. But during this battle, we learned that Mai's abilities are nowhere near enough to face off against Maki. Mai is easily defeated by her sister and thus eliminated from the Goodwill event. This now leads us to the final one-to-one battle which occurs between the Tokyo and Kyoto students, which is Megumi facing off against Noritoshi. The two of them have very differing ideologies, as Megumi establishes that he believes in serving everybody regardless of who they are, and that Megumi had left the Zenin family of his own will, and that he desires to act of his own accord instead of being their pawn. On the other hand, Noritoshi was raised as a possible heir to the Kamo family, and his entire life revolves around following the ideals of the Kamo family, so that he may one day be able to fulfill that role. And it is for this reason that he had worked together with the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High in order to sneak a semi-grade 1 curse spirit into the battlefield. We learned that Noritoshi was supposed to use this semi-grade 1 curse spirit in order to kill Yuji, but instead, the second year of Tokyo Jujutsu High, Toge Inumaki, ends up encountering it. However, the curse spirit is quickly beheaded as the special grade curse spirit Hanami makes his appearance. Hanami's arrival is one part of a larger plan that is hatched by Mahito's group. This plan involves Mahito and the others invading Tokyo Jujutsu High. Along with Hanami, a cursed user called Juzu also arrives. He ends up casting a curtain over the battlefield. This curtain allows anybody to enter into the area apart from Satoru Gojo. The battle between Megumi and Noritoshi is interrupted by the arrival of Hanami, as Toge utilizes his cursed speech while Noritoshi makes use of his blood manipulation in order to fend off the special grade curse. Hanami knocks Noritoshi unconscious as Inumaki uses the last ounce of his strength to blast Hanami away. This attack buys enough time for Maki to join the fight, as she works together with Megumi to face off against Hanami. Megumi ends up summoning cursed tools from his shadows, as he passes Maki the special grade cursed tool Playful Cloud. The two of them work together and battle Hanami as they try to figure out his weakness, but the special grade curse proves to be too powerful, and not to mention his outer body being far too durable for them to land any attacks that will have any lasting damage on their opponent. Megumi's Jujutsu abilities are nullified by Hanami's cursed bud, which ends ends up growing from his stomach. As the situation seems hopeless for Maki, the two of them are helped by the arrival of Yuji and Todo. During this 2 vs 1 battle, Todo challenges Yuji by stating that he will not assist Yuji until he is able to successfully land an ability called Black Flash against his opponent. Black Flash is a phenomenon that occurs with Jujutsu sorcerers, which greatly amplifies their physical striking abilities. This happens when cursed energy is applied to an attack within 1/1,000,000th of a second. Yuji agrees to Todo's challenge and begins his fight with Hanami, but his first attempt at utilizing Black Flash fails due to Yuji's anger. But it is only after Todo slaps Yuji and helps him to regain his focus that Yuji is able to momentarily suppress his anger for now. After regaining his focus, Yuji rushes the special grade Cursed Spirit. He strikes him within 1/1,000,000th of a second of applying his cursed energy, resulting in a Black Flash forming, which amplifies Yuji's striking power. After Yuji clears Todo's challenge, he is assisted by his newly formed mentor, senpai, and best friend. Thanks to the help of Todo, Yuji now has even more strength after having unlocked the power of Black Flash. Together, the two of them now pose as a plausible threat against Hanami. Unlike any of his prior battles, Hanami begins to really enjoy the thrill of the battle while he is fighting Yuji and Todo. This excitement ends up fueling his strength as he gains the upper hand against the two of them, and it is at that moment that Todo decides that if they have any fighting chance, then he needs to utilize his own cursed technique. We learn that Todo's ability is called Boogie Woogie, and it allows him to switch places with anybody by clapping. By utilizing his cursed technique, it results in Hanami having difficulty predicting where he will be attacked from. The two of them unleash a barrage of attacks against the special grade curse, as they swap positions with each other repeatedly. After having thoroughly analyzed Hanami's abilities, Todo is able to create openings for Yuji to land 4 consecutive Black Flash attacks, thanks to his application of his Boogie Woogie curse technique. But as the battle continues, Hanami starts to get accustomed to their fighting strategy. It is at this moment that Todo changes his approach by swapping Yuji out with the cursed tool Playful Cloud, as it is revealed that Todo is able to switch the positions of anything as long as it contains cursed energy. Taking advantage of Hanami's confusion, Todo is able to successfully break through Hanami's hard shell, thanks to successfully landing an attack with the cursed tool Playful Cloud. As a last resort, just before Hanami is about to activate his domain expansion, the curtain that was erected by the cursed user Juzu is dispelled, revealing that Gojo is floating above the battlefield. Gojo first takes out the cursed user Juzu. He leaves him alive for questioning, in order to find out what the motives of Mahito's group are. It is then that Hanami attempts to retreat, trying his best to avoid an encounter with Gojo, but it is too late as Gojo unleashes his ability Hollow Technique Purple. This is a limitless attack that is utilized by Gojo. It results in the formation of a purple orb, which is created by Gojo simultaneously activating 2 curse techniques, the first being Curse Technique Lapse Blue, and the second being Curse Technique Reversal Red. The combination of these 2 techniques results in the formation of a single purple sphere. This orb is able to destroy everything in its path, as it fuses together the diverging and converging properties of the Limitless. Without much effort, Gojo is able to easily bring the battle to an end. But it is at this moment that we learn the true motives behind Mahito's group, as Mahito was able to escape with several cursed objects that were being housed within Tokyo Jujutsu High, as we learn that this was the true objective of their invasion of Tokyo Jujutsu High. Hanami and Juzu served as simple distractions, while Mahito was able to break into the school and steal the cursed objects. After successfully escaping, Mahito regroups with the injured Hanami, as we learn that he was able to successfully steal 6 of Sukuna's fingers, as well as revealing that he was able to steal the death painting wounds numbers 1 to 3. The aftermath of this invasion results in several casualties, and as the teachers are about to cancel the Goodwill event, Todo refuses to allow this to happen, as the students vote to conclude the event with a baseball game. After this match, the Kyoto and Tokyo students are able to understand each other better, as the Goodwill event wraps up in chapter 54 with the Tokyo school being declared the victor. I believe that during this arc, several of the Tokyo students were matched up excellently against some of the Kyoto students. Through these one-to-one battles that occur between the students, we get to learn a lot about the individual characters, as well as any bonds that exist between the characters. We got a fascinating matchup between the 2 cursed corpses, Panda and Mekamaru, where we got an insight into each of their abilities. We get to learn a bit of history about these 2 second-year students. We learn that Mekamaru is being controlled by the Jujutsu sorcerer Kokichi Muta. After the conclusion of that intense battle, Panda reveals to Mekamaru that similar to him, he did not fit in with his peers. However, despite being a cursed corpse, Panda has never felt jealous of other humans. Because Panda isn't human, through his character we get a fascinating insight into the human condition. connection. He states that he finds the insecurities of humans to be gross, but despite this, he is still able to appreciate the qualities that humans possess that he does not. He tells Mechamaru that he is aware that he has suffered, but it doesn't make it right for him to have resentment or to feel jealous of others. Panda reminds him that they have far more similarities than differences, and that they aren't enemies. In the end, their battle concludes with Panda stating that he will help Mechamaru fulfill any wishes that he may have. After Panda speaks to him and recalling all of the comments made by his classmates, Kokichi thinks about his wish to be free and to walk among his peers. He then asks Panda if he would still want to help him, even after seeing his decrepit body, but Panda states that he doesn't care about the appearances of others. The battle between the two cursed corpses results in a mutual understanding forming between the two of them, as we see the start of what appears to be a friendship that is formed between the two characters. Through the kindness and indifference of Panda, Mechamaru is able to see that they have similarities, instead of focusing entirely on their differences, and on what others have and what he lacks. The next significant key battle that occurs during this arc is the fight between the twin sisters of the Zenin family. Maki is Mai's older sister, and during this battle we learn that Mai relies heavily upon her revolver. After Maki assumes that Mai has fired all 6 of her bullets that were within the revolver, she charges forward to bring an end to the battle, but it is here that Mai reveals that she has a cursed technique called construction. Her ability allows her to create one more bullet, but at the expense of all of her cursed energy. With a surprise bullet being fired out of nowhere towards Maki's direction, Mai believes to have won the battle, but unfortunately for her, Maki is able to catch the bullet with her bare hand. Mai fails at her attempt to defeat her sister, as Maki places her sword against her, signifying that she has won the battle and has eliminated her sister from the Goodwill event. During chapter 42, we learn a bit of history about these two characters, as Mai thinks about her relationship with Maki. We get some glimpses throughout this fight, but at the end we learn that Mai had desired to remain at home, despite the fact that she was being constantly harassed and discriminated by the Zenin family. Her older sister decided to be free from this torment, so she had left the Zenin family, leaving Mai behind. The hatred that Mai has for Maki formed after Maki had broken her promise. Maki had promised to never leave her sister's side, but despite this, she had left her behind, and it is for this reason that Mai considers her to be a liar. The complex bond between these two sisters is introduced to us here, and during the subsequent arcs we learn a lot more about Maki and Mai, and we get to appreciate the unique path that both of these characters are on, and how over time their pursuit for becoming stronger Jujutsu sorcerers impacts and affects their relationship. The battle between these Zenin sisters was definitely a highlight for me, and an aspect of this story arc that I really did enjoy. The next battle that I want to talk about is the battle that takes place between Megumi and Noritoshi. Earlier on I spoke about the differing ideologies of these two characters. Through this battle we are introduced to the big 3 sorcerer families, and we learn about the existence of inherited curse techniques, Megumi having formerly belonged to the Zenin family, while Noritoshi belongs to the Kamo family, desiring to be its next leader. This battle is not only underpinned by the differing beliefs of these two characters, it is also a visual spectacle to behold, and this is credited to the variety of curse techniques that are utilized within this encounter, and I truly believe that the anime does so much justice to this fight, with one of my favorite moments of this fight being Megumi utilizing his newly acquired Shikigami Max Elephant to unleash a rush of water towards Noritoshi's location. Noritoshi and Megumi have complete different views on how to be a sorcerer, with Noritoshi willing to do anything as long as it benefits his family, while Megumi has no connection with the Zenin family and completely disagrees with Noritoshi's way of doing things. Their battle is eventually interrupted by the arrival of Hanami, and this is where something truly fascinating occurs, as the two students from the differing schools are made to put aside their differences and to work together. We see Megumi, Inumaki and Noritoshi fight against Hanami, and it eventually culminates in the teamwork of Yuji and Aoi Todo against the special grade curse. Now this perfectly allows us to segue into the relationship that has formed between Yuji and Aoi Todo. Their fight is initially a one-sided display of Todo's immense strength and power. This encounter between these two characters eventually transforms into something that I've not quite seen within any other shonen manga, as a unique bond begins to be formed between Todo and Yuji. After Todo realizes the incredible innate ability that the unrefined Yuji possesses, this bond forms after Todo realizes that Yuji has a similar taste in women to him, and then after engaging in several bouts of close quarters combat, Todo realizes that Yuji has intense levels of endurance, as he is able to resist Todo's attacks, using the momentum of Todo's attacks in order to fire back equally as explosive counterattacks. During their battle, Yuji uses his environment to his advantage. The first year is going up against a third year. He is outmatched, but Yuji is unwilling to give up, and he isn't afraid of his opponent despite the odds being overwhelmingly stacked against him. Yuji is willing to do anything and everything to hold back Todo. During this battle, Yuji proves himself to be worthy of Todo's mentorship, and this is especially after he is able to blindside Todo from above by landing a successful divergent fist. This proves that Yuji is able to think ahead in battle. Todo begins to help Yuji after questioning if he is satisfied at his current level, and if he is, then they won't be able to continue being best friends. When Todo asks Yuji if he is okay with being weak, Yuji fires back, refuting this notion. It is thanks to Yuji's passionate response which inspires Todo to assist him. He helps Yuji to realize that despite his divergent fist being a good technique, it would be ineffective against a special grade. This leads Yuji to understand that he must apply his cursed energy at the point of impact in order to maximize the damage dealt by a single blow. It is here that Todo further elaborates and teaches Yuji that if he is to do this, then he must allow his cursed energy to flow freely throughout the entirety of his body. After heeding Todo's advice, they once again take part in close quarters combat, as Todo is determined to guide Yuji into becoming stronger. Their battle and eventual friendship culminates in them two working together to battle against Hanami, in what is easily one of my favorite battles to take place during this arc. Yuji and Todo creatively taking advantage of Todo's boogie woogie technique left me utterly jaw-dropped. I remember being at the edge of my seat when I had read these manga chapters, and when I had seen this high-paced, exciting battle adapted into the anime, showcasing just how creative Gigi Akutami can get with his cursed techniques, and how he can utilize the variation of these techniques that exist in order to come up with fascinating and engaging encounters that ensure that you'll be invested in these fights until their outcome. The Kyoto Goodwill event arc is the longest story arc that we have had up until this point, running for a total of 23 chapters, proving that Akutami is just as successful at creating long-form stories. Taking us up to chapter 54 of the manga, we are well into the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, and the next story arc deals with the aftermath of the events of the Kyoto Goodwill event arc, as we learn about the consequences of the actions of Mahito's group, as the next arc involves the cursed tools that Mahito had stolen from Tokyo Jujutsu High. Welcome to the 5th video in my Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis series, and in this video we're going to be talking about the 6th arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Death Painting arc. This arc follows the first years of Jujutsu High as they are tasked with investigating several strange murders which appear to be linked. This arc follows up with the events of the prior arc as Mahito puts to use some of the cursed objects that he had stolen, as he brings 2 of the death paintings that he had stolen to life, as they serve as one of the key antagonistic forces of this story arc. The first years of Jujutsu High not only have to investigate these mysterious murders, but they're also going to be up against these death paintings. This arc has somewhat of a focus on the character of Megumi, as we learn a bit more about the circumstances of how his sister may have been cursed, as well as the investigation into these mysterious murders taking us to Megumi's former school, where we get to see the characters interacting with his former classmates. In typical Jujutsu Kaisen fashion, a lot occurs within this short story arc, so let's dive into the events of this story arc and analyze what Akutami was trying to convey to us. By the end of this video, you'll have an understanding of all of the battles that take place during this arc, as well as understanding the motives of the antagonists, and how the events of this arc not only impact Megumi, but also Yuji and Nobara. The Death Painting arc takes place between chapters 55 to 64, and it is the final story arc that is adapted into season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen, covering episodes 22 to 24 of the anime. It's an excellent follow-up arc to the Kyoto Goodwill event, and it throws our familiar cast of characters into the deep end, as their investigation into these mysterious murders leads them to several life or death battles. The Death Painting arc has some similarity to the Cursed Womb arc, in the sense that they are once again facing off against another special grade cursed spirit that has absorbed one of Sukuna's fingers. But after everything that has occurred within the story up until this point, and all of the training that the characters have undergone, it's going to be interesting to see how these characters react to facing off against the death paintings and the special grade cursed spirit. So the arc begins with the first years investigating some strange deaths. Each of the victims had died in a very similar manner, leading investigators to believe that these deaths may be linked. The victims were found stabbed to death at the entrances of their homes, and similarly all 3 of these individuals who were killed had recently complained to their their building management that the door to their apartment wasn't locking properly, and they had returned home to find it unlocked on several occasions. They eventually learned that all 3 of these victims had attended the same junior high school as Megumi. When Megumi suggests to speak to a classmate who had known the 3 victims, they find out that this individual too had died in a similar manner to the other 3 victims. He had been killed in front of the entrance to his home. We eventually learned that these 4 victims had partaken in the Yasuhachi Bridge bungee jumping. Megumi explains that the Yasuhachi Bridge is known for suicides, and it is a hotspot for paranormal activity. Back when these 4 victims had attended the junior high school, it was popular to bungee jump off of that bridge, and to make things even more creepy, they had been doing this in the middle of the night. It was described as somewhat of a test of courage. The teachers and parents of these 4 students had found out about this after one day these 4 students did not show up to school. After the school had contacted the parents, they find out that they hadn't come home from the night before. After some searching, they had found the 4 students laying unconscious under the bridge. After gaining consciousness, the 4 of them apparently didn't remember anything. During this time, Mahito and Geto bring to life the cursed womb death paintings by placing them into human vessels. This occurs while the first years visit Yasuhachi Bridge to continue their investigation, assuming that a cursed spirit that resides underneath the bridge is responsible for the murders of these 4 victims. Yuji and the others struggle to find any evidence of a cursed spirit at the bridge, which temporarily puts a stop to their investigation. It is then that we learn when Megumi's older sister had attended junior high, she had also gone to Yasuhachi Bridge at night. This means that if they do not find the cursed spirit that is responsible for these murders, then the life of Megumi's older sister Sumiki is also at risk. Yuji notes how emotionally distraught Megumi becomes after he learns that his sister's life is in danger. Now this explains to us the actions that Megumi takes within this story arc, and why he is so emotionally invested into the outcome of this investigation. From what we know about the investigation so far is that the cursed spirit attacks its victims within a certain time limit. It's no use on relying on Gojo sensei because he is away for a week, and Megumi realizes that he cannot sit back and wait for Gojo to return. This cursed spirit, whatever it is, needs to be exorcised immediately. It is at this point that Megumi starts to distance himself from Yuji and Nobara, and he starts to take matters into his own hands. After Megumi tells the 2 of them to go home, he returns to Yasuhachi Bridge after realizing that the cursed spirit must be below the bridge, but he is then accompanied by Yuji and Nobara, who saw through his lies, as they scold him for never telling anything about himself to them, because after all, they are a team and they need to work together. They are aware that whatever is going on is deeply impacting Megumi. They reassure him by saying that he doesn't need to share what is going on with them, but he should at least depend on them as friends. We are aware that Megumi's older sister is bedbound. She appears to be in somewhat of a coma. She is pretty much laying there defenseless, waiting for the cursed spirit to attack her, and it is for this reason that Megumi needs to exorcise this cursed spirit immediately. Megumi is able to deduce the correct sequence of conditions that need to be met in order to pass through the barrier of the curse. They enter into the domain of the cursed spirit. They realize that the curse that has inhabited Yasuhachi Bridge is a mole-like curse, as it pokes its head out of several areas of the bridge. Just before they can face off against this cursed spirit, one of the death paintings, Kechizu, arrives. Megumi tells Nobara and Yuji to focus on the death painting, while he focuses on the Yasuhachi Bridge cursed spirit. Yuji begins battling Kechizu while Megumi and Nobara attempt to exorcise the mole-like cursed spirit. But then another one of the death paintings arrives, as the older brother of Kechizu, Eso, takes Nobara out of the cursed spirit's domain. Kechizu also leaves the cursed spirit's domain, as Yuji is left with no choice but to follow him, leaving Megumi on his own to face off against the mole-like cursed spirit within its domain. We learn that the death paintings Iso and Kechizu were tasked by Mahito to retrieve Sukuna's fingers. After Megumi is easily able to take out the mole-like cursed spirit, it transforms into a special grade cursed spirit, as we learn that it has absorbed one of Sukuna's fingers. It has a strikingly similar appearance to the special grade cursed spirit that appeared within the detention center during the Cursed Womb arc. Megumi realizes that the Yasuhachi Bridge cursed spirit had only attacked its victims from the month of June. After questioning why now after all of these years, he realizes that the cursed spirit was activated in the same month that Yuji had swallowed Sukuna's finger, leading to him manifesting and bringing to life the legendary cursed spirit Ryumen Sukuna. This appears to have activated the Yasuhachi Bridge cursed spirit, thus explaining why it is such a powerful cursed spirit, because it is linked to Sukuna. Megumi now begins his battle with the special grade cursed spirit, who is also a bearer of one of Sukuna's fingers. He learns that this special grade cursed spirit is far more powerful than the one that they had faced off against within the detention center. After being soundly beaten by the special grade, Megumi lets go of all of his restrictions and restraints. He allows his cursed energy to flow throughout the entirety of his body, as he ends up manifesting an incomplete form of his domain expansion for the very first time. After breaking through his limits, Megumi is able to defeat the special grade grade cursed spirit, proving that he is indeed far more powerful than he thinks he is. And this also confirms Sukuna's initial assessment of Megumi right at the start of the story, where he had expressed interest in his character. After Megumi defeats the special grade, we get some backstory for his character in chapter 59. We learn that Megumi and Sumiki's parents had gotten together when they were very young, but they had separated just as quickly as they had gotten married. We learned that Megumi's father had gained some divorce money by selling his son to the Zenin family. We learned that it was Gojo who had eventually come to Megumi's aid and had taken him under his wing, promising that they would work together as sorcerers in the future. We learned that because of Megumi's early life experiences, he had started to resent everybody but his older sister. A heavy emphasis is placed upon Megumi believing that she was a good person, but he is left confused after he realizes that she was cursed. The identity of the cursed spirit is unknown, but like multiple cases throughout the country, Megumi's older sister was cursed, and they had no idea as to why. The after effects of this curse are that Tsumiki is now in a never-ending cycle of sleep. Akutami perfectly conveys to us the relationship between Megumi and his older sister through manga panels which contain nothing but text. The white manga panels are Tsumiki speaking, while the black are Megumi, as she states that she would rather spend her time thinking about those that she loves instead of cursing them, and Megumi comments that his older sister was always smiling and saying nice things. And the next panel has Tsumiki saying that it's not a bad thing for individuals to not forgive others, because this is how Megumi shows his way of kindness. And in the next panel, Megumi comments on his sister's words, as he states that she was able to spin his shortcomings into positives. When they were both in school together, Megumi would get into fights with people who were bullying others. His older sister would get upset by this, and it was for the fact that Megumi was hurting others. Megumi's justification was that they were bad people, but Tsumiki wanted Megumi to show mercy to them. Megumi was aware that his older sister would get upset whenever he had hurt somebody. He was getting annoyed by this because it was hypocritical. He had believed that she shouldn't have been annoyed with him, because after all, he was helping those who were being bullied. But eventually Megumi came to realize that he was wrong, because just like how Megumi had chosen to help people who were being bullied, his older sister Tsumiki had chosen to protect Megumi and had wanted him to stay out of harm's way. Megumi was realizing that he was being immature. He apologizes and just wants his sister to wake up already. He is aware that all he did was get rid of the curse that was inhabiting Yasuhachi Bridge. It's not going to change the fact that his sister is still sleeping, and the curse that is causing this is a separate matter. I love this arc because of how much insight it gives into Megumi's character, how we learn about his early life and his relationship with his sister, as well as how he was taken into the care of Gojo. He is a fascinating character who definitely needed expanding upon, and I'm relieved that we got so much information about Megumi's backstory within this arc. It helps us to better understand his motives and desires for the upcoming chapters. And in addition to this, it also makes you care a lot for the character, as we already know so much about Yuji's character, and you have to give credit to Akutami. Whereas so many other authors will focus on developing the protagonist, he has gone out of his way to develop Megumi's character through this story arc, as at the start he was taking matters into his own hands, but then realized that he can depend on his friends. And when he realizes that his sister's life is in danger, he comes to accept that he was wrong, and he apologizes to his sister for being immature when they were both attending junior high school. Megumi ends up falling asleep as we now turn our attention over to Yuji and Nobara facing off against Iso and Kechisu. The death paintings quickly become aware of the presence of Sukuna's finger after Megumi defeats the special grade and gets out of the cursed spirit's barrier. Similarly to the Kyoto Goodwill event, Yuji has another team up during this arc, as he teams up with Nobara to face off against the two death paintings. Yuji and Nobara end up being attacked by an ability of the death paintings called Rot Technique Decay. Their bodies start decaying for the point that they were attacked, as Iso tells them that Yuji has about 15 minutes while Nobara has 10 minutes to live. The ability of the death paintings is decomposition. If they don't do anything about it, then by the morning all that will remain of them will be bones. In chapter 60 we get some backstory about the cursed womb death paintings. We learn that each of these cursed wombs had originated from a woman who was bearing a child with mixed blood, both cursed spirit and human. They were all mysterious pregnancies. We learn that these cursed wombs were being collected by one of the most evil Jujutsu sorcerers in history, Noritoshi Kamo. There were 9 such pregnancies where a child was born from a cursed spirit and a human. All 9 of them were aborted, and records of what happened to the mother were destroyed. The death painting wombs numbers 1 to 3 were cursed objects worthy of special grade. For 150 years, the 3 death paintings were kept prisoner in glass jars. They had only known of each other's existence. They were sealed away, surviving only for each other. We learned that Mahito had stolen these 3 death paintings, and after being incarnated by Mahito and Geto, they agreed to work with them. The 3 brothers share an incredibly close bond with each other, as they state that the 3 of them are one. I think it's excellent that we get to learn some backstory about the world of Jujutsu Kaisen through the midpoint of this battle. We learn about the existence of Noritoshi Kamo, and how the cursed wombs were formed. Just as we find out all of this information, we cut back to the battle, as Nobara impales herself with the ability Straw Doll Technique Resonance. By doing this, she is able to counterattack against the death paintings, as they both appear to be hurt from Nobara's self-inflicted injury. She continues to use her ability to stun the 2 death paintings. Yuji then has the opportunity to unleash a barrage of attacks against Kechizu. Iso is left with no choice but to undo the decay technique in order to save his younger brother. But the after effects of the technique remain with both Nobara and Yuji. The pain that they received from the deactivated technique helps to sharpen their focus. This focus allows them to tap into the sparks of black as they both unleash the ability Black Flash. Both brothers are severely injured. Kechizu attempts to attack Nobara with one final strike, but she ends up exorcising the cursed spirit. In chapter 62, we see Eso crying for his fallen younger brother. Yuji is surprised to see Eso crying over his younger brother, as he is shocked that a cursed spirit could have tears of affection, and this results in Yuji hesitating to deliver the final blow. In this instance, Nobara had also stopped fighting, as the 2 of them realized that they weren't up against cursed spirits, they were fighting against flesh and blood. Eso, who is injured, aborts a speeding truck as he tries to escape. Nobara stops the death painting by impaling its severed arm with the ability Straw Doll Technique Resonance. This stuns the cursed spirit, giving Yuji enough time to deliver the final blow to Eso, but before he does so, he apologizes to him. At this time, the older brother of Eso and Kechizu, who is called Chozo, learns that his younger brothers have been killed. He is deeply impacted by this news, as he learns from Mahito and Geto that his younger brothers were killed by the first years of Jujutsu High. I want to talk about this exchange that occurs between Nobara and Yuji at the start of chapter 63, after they had killed the 2 brothers. Firstly, let's look at how Akutami draws this within the manga. He has 4 pages where a back and forth occurs in a very unique manner, as one page is dedicated to Nobara's expressions, and the other page is dedicated to Yuji's expressions, and I've never really seen this done in any other manga. They are both talking to each other and reflecting on killing flesh and blood people. This conversation is occurring because despite them being curses, the 2 of them had cried for one another, and Yuji can't help but to feel upset about this, as he speaks to Nobara about his feelings. But Nobara, on the other hand, tries to reassure Yuji by saying that things like this happen, especially as a Jujutsu sorcerer. You are limited to the number of people that you can save as an individual. Yuji feels guilt because Eso was crying for his younger brother who had died in front of him. Despite the fact that he is relieved that both himself and Nobara had survived, he is saddened by the fact that tears were shed because of their actions. Nobara agrees and states that the 2 of them were accomplices in the murder of these 2 brothers. It's a really touching conversation, and it highlights the maturity of these 2 characters. In most shonen series, the protagonist or side characters may end up killing an enemy, but we hardly ever get to talk about the feelings of taking another life. Jujutsu Kaisen excels in this conversation, and I have to give Akutami credit for writing into a story the value of a life, whether if it is a good life or a bad life. You can see that Yuji's heart is in the right place, but like Nobara had stated, sometimes it cannot be helped, especially in their line of work. As this story arc wraps up, Sukuna tricks Yuji into eating the finger that they had just retrieved. 2 days later, Gojo hears about how his students had handled the investigation, and he is impressed by them. Gojo then takes it upon himself to enlist the help of both Meimei and Aoi Todo, so that they can recommend the 5 students Yuji, Megumi, Nobara, Maki, and Panda to be upgraded to grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer status. In chapter 63, Megumi also speaks to Nobara, as he explains how Yuji consuming the finger of Sukuna was a trigger for the Yasuhaji bridge deaths. Yuji had consumed the finger of Sukuna in order to help Megumi initially, but despite this, his actions had resulted in the cursed spirit residing within Yasuhaji bridge being activated, and thus leading to the murders of 4 people. Megumi tells Nobara not to tell Yuji this, as he will be upset if he had learned about this, but we then cut to Sukuna speaking to Yuji, as he tells him that it's all his fault, and it's because Yuji had consumed Sukuna's fingers that the spirits that Sukuna had cut up and scattered have now awoken. He laughs at Yuji's desire to help people, as he states that it is because of Yuji that people are dying. In response to this, Yuji perfectly complements what Megumi had stated to Nobara, as he tells Sukuna not to say a word of this to Megumi. Chapter 64, the final chapter of the death painting arc, ends on a light-hearted note, as Nobara ends up meeting one of Yuji's old classmates. She is called Yuko Ozawa. Nobara finds out that she has a crush on Yuji, and before long Megumi ends up finding out, and the 2 of them try to come up with a plan for her to reunite with Yuji. The thing about Yuko is that when she had known Yuji, she was quite overweight, but now she has more of a slender appearance, and she believes that she can win win over Yuji this way. When Yuji meets her, he immediately identifies her. We get a flashback to when Yuji was in school, as he is asked if he likes anybody in his class, and if he had to pick someone, he states he would choose Yuko Ozawa. The other students comment that she is fat, but Yuji doesn't focus on her superficial appearance, as he comments that her behavior is very elegant, especially the way that she writes. Yuko ends up appreciating how sincere Yuji was with his words, as she realizes by approaching Yuji now with this new physical appearance, she too is being shallow. So because of this, she decides not to reveal her feelings about Yuji to him. And in this chapter, we even get some hints of Nobara maybe having some feelings for Yuji, as she is annoyed that Yuji isn't after her, and how she has a couple of moments where her heart skips a beat at the mention of Yuji. It's a really comedic and light-hearted chapter after several chapters of intense action, and it's one that I really enjoyed. And this brings us to the end of the death painting arc. We are also coming to an end to all of the material that was adapted in the first season of the Jujutsu Kaisen anime. So all of the videos from this point will now be covering manga exclusive content, with the next video in my Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis series focusing on Gojo's past. So for the next couple of Jujutsu Kaisen videos, we'll be taking a break from Yuji and the others, as I will also be making a video covering Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 in the month of December, because this is also the month where the first Jujutsu Kaisen movie will be releasing, a movie that is going to be adapting Volume 0 of Jujutsu Kaisen. So there is no better time than now to discuss the story of Yuta Okotsu, and I hope that all of these videos will serve as the perfect build-up to the next main story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, which is the Shibuya Incident arc, the longest story arc of Jujutsu Kaisen, and one that is revered as one of the best manga story arcs of our modern time. So I hope you stick around for the upcoming Jujutsu Kaisen content on this channel, and I look forward to seeing all of you in my next Jujutsu Kaisen arc analysis video. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.